Chapter 405. Ning Ke heard the exclamations of the crowd. As a Tang, he knew that it was not a glorious thing to kill an enemy after he had surrendered. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Professor Huang He's worried expression and shaking his head. He knew what the professor was worried about. If he killed Lu Yiqing under such circumstances, it would be equivalent to forming an unresolvable feud with the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom, especially with the world's most powerful sage of sword, Liu Bai. Ning Ke had never thought of killing Lu Yiqing, because he wanted the South Jin Kingdom to live a life worse than death. Now that Lu Yiqing was blind, he was satisfied with the result. But he looked at Lu Yiqing, who was sitting under the peach tree with a pale face. He slowly and firmly raised his padao, as if he was going to chop down at the next moment. That was because he was very clear on one thing. Even those who had fallen into a situation worse than death still didn't want to die. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a situation in the world. The more determined and powerful a person was, the more they believed that they could escape from this predicament, and the more greedy they were for life. Lu Yiqing looked miserable and desperate. But there was no doubt that he was a man with a strong will, so he definitely did not want to die. Ning Ke wanted him to feel that he was going to die soon, so that he could achieve his goal. As expected, Lu Yiqing felt the cold knife style coming from above his head. He felt Ning Ke's undisguised killing intent. His body suddenly stiffened and he said hoarsely, "You want to kill me? As long as the sword lives, the man lives. If the sword dies, the man dies." Ning Ke said, "Chao Xiaoshu's sword is in your hands, so he must be dead. Since I have broken the sword, would I let you, who killed him, live?" Lu Yiqing felt fear. He struggled for a moment and said, "I did not kill Chao Xiaoshu." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "With your cultivation state, you could not hurt Chao Xiaoshu. But who knows if you used any dirty tricks?" Lu Yiqing smiled nervously and said, "Chao Xiaoshu has already entered the knowing destiny state. Do you think those dirty tricks can be used against him?" Ning Ke said, "But his sword is in your hands. Since we all agree that Chao Xiaoshu is strong enough, there seems to be only one possibility." Lu Yiqing seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly became nervous, and did not want to say another word. Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "Liu Bai did it himself?" Lu Yiqing did not answer his question. Ning Ke looked up at the peach branch with broken petals and suddenly said, "Tell me what happened at that time. Tell me Chao Xiaoshu's current situation, and I won't kill you." Lu Yiqing frowned and fell into an intense struggle. Right at this moment, a clamor suddenly arose from the nearby crowd, and the faint sound of an intense argument could be heard. Hearing the voice, Lu Yiqing was slightly refreshed and looked up. His eyes were blinded by Haotian's divine light and became even more terrifying because of his pride. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, "Do you still dare to challenge my brother?" Ning Ke looked at him and shook his head. He said, "Liu Bai belongs to my second brother, not me. Of course, if Liu Bai is beaten into a pile of dog shit by my second brother, I don't mind stepping on him." Hearing this, Lu Yiqing's face twisted in shock. In his entire life, he had never heard anyone dare to mention his elder brother in such a tone. His elder brother was the strongest person in the world, the Sword Saint Liu Bai. No matter if it was an enemy or a friend, when the Sword Saint Liu Bai was mentioned, they would involuntarily show some respect. Who dared to say that the Sword Saint Liu Bai would be beaten into a pile of dog shit by someone like Ning Ke? Some time had passed since the end of the battle. The onlookers saw Ning Ke walk to Lu Yiqing, but they could not hear what they were saying. They only saw Ning Ke's posture of wanting to kill Lu Yiqing, so they exclaimed. The Divine Hall's ambassadors and the sects by the side of the road were all silent. The South Jin Kingdom's ambassador and 2 disciples of the Sword Garret ran down the hill in a panic, wanting to stop this from happening. The Yulin royal guards had already pulled up a long rope to guard the side gate of the academy. Other than the 2 participants in the duel, no one was allowed to enter. Both sides immediately quarreled fiercely. The South Jin Kingdom's ambassador said angrily, "We admit defeat if we lose, but why won't you let us in to treat Master Lu? What are you Tangs trying to do?" The Tang Empire was the most powerful country, followed by the South Jin Kingdom. Therefore, the people of the South Jin Kingdom were used to seeing the Tangs as opponents. However, the Tangs did not even care about the South Jin Kingdom. The Yulin Royal Guards were the proudest group of people in Chang'an, and they even turned a blind eye to the ambassador's anger. The conversation about Cao Xiaoshu was between Ning Ke and Lu Yiqing, so they did not purposely raise their volume. Therefore, the onlookers of Chang'an and the students of the academy did not hear it. However, the cultivators in the horse carriages by the side of the road heard it clearly. Cao Xiaoshu's name used to only be famous in the underworld of Jianghu. However, after the battle at the Spring Breeze Pavilion, his name suddenly spread throughout the cultivation world. Only then did all the sects know that there was a hidden powerhouse in the Tang Empire, and that this powerhouse had entered the knowing destiny state not long after. Cao Xiaoshu had actually been killed or imprisoned by the sword garret of the South Jin Kingdom. The cultivators of the various sects knew the story of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, so they naturally thought that they understood Ning Ke's anger. They understood why he raised his knife and was ready to chop off Lu Yiqing's head. However, they did not think that it would be the right decision for Ning Ke to kill Lu Yiqing. What had happened to Cao Xiaoshu was only Lu Yiqing's own words. The sword garret of the South Jin Kingdom could completely deny it, because no one had any evidence. However, Lu Yiqing's blindness and severe injuries were witnessed by thousands of people. Under Haotian, no matter how tyrannical the Tangs were, they could not stop the South Jin Kingdom from treating Lu Yiqing's injuries and taking him away. However, it was obvious that Ning Ke was not going to let Lu Yiqing leave the academy alive. Ning Ke held his knife. Lu Yiqing lowered his head, as if he was waiting for death. However, he was actually listening to the movements outside. The South Jin Kingdom envoy roared angrily at the soldiers of the Yulin Royal Guards. The two disciples of the sword garret looked extremely angry, as if they were ready to pull out their swords from the sheaths at their waists. The atmosphere in the field became unusually tense because of the confrontation. At this moment, a voice came from the side door of the academy, which had been silent for a long time. The voice was calm and serious. It sounded gentle, but there was an unquestionable meaning in it. This person has been meditating outside the academy for 3 months. His willpower and perseverance are commendable. It is already impolite of us to not invite him into the academy. Today, he is seriously injured and blind. How can he withstand such a long journey? If we leave him to fend for himself, it would be against the harmony of heaven. It is not how we treat our guest. Youngest brother, why don't you bring him into the academy and treat him properly? Everyone was confused when they heard this. They wondered what this person was trying to say after saying so much correct nonsense. When they heard that this person wanted to bring Lu Yiqing into the academy, they could not help but burst into an uproar. There were many wonderful people in the academy. However, there was only one person who could use such a serious tone to say such correct nonsense. He was so unreasonable that he wanted to lock Lu Yiqing in the academy. Of course, it was second brother. Ning Ke smiled when he heard second brother's words and put his padao back into its sheath. Professor Huang he smiled bitterly and shook his head. He thought that this matter would become more and more troublesome. The duel that Lu Yiqing, the younger brother of the sword sage of South Jin Kingdom, and Mr. 13 of the academy, Ning Ke, had prepared for 3 months had ended. The onlookers gradually dispersed. Their faces were still filled with longing because they were only mortals and could not see the details of the battle between these cultivators. In their eyes, the battle had ended with Lu Yiqing stabbing and Ning Ke chopping. Not understanding did not mean that they would not talk about it. This was destined to be the most sensational duel in the world in recent times. It would definitely be retold by the people of Chang'an, and eventually become a more exciting and thrilling legend that was completely different from the real situation. In the days to come, there would definitely be many people discussing Ning Kei's simple and unparalleled slash in the wine shops and sex deep in the mountains. And it might even become a distant memory of the people in Chang'an. Dozens of horse carriages on the official road gradually left the academy. Only the horse carriage that belonged to the West Hill Divine Palace's diplomatic corps was still there, looking a little lonely. Cheng Lixue did not leave. He walked out of the broken carriage and came to He Mingqi's side. He looked down at the side door of the academy, his brows full of confusion. The side door of the academy was tightly shut. There were some bloodstains on the green brick ground in front of the door. There were several short ridges formed by dust around it. They had previously proved Lu Yiqing's strength, but now they seemed a little ridiculous. Is it really possible to cultivate in talisman and martial arts at the same time? Cheng Lixue frowned and looked in that direction, thinking hard. As the priest of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace, he had a profound state of Taoism and was even more knowledgeable. However, he had never read about cultivating in talisman and martial arts at the same time in any ancient book. Of course, he had never heard of anyone successfully cultivating it. Even if you cultivated in seclusion in the cliff cave for 3 months and combined the two into one, why did you use my West Hill divine skill when you chopped at the end? Cheng Lixue asked himself a question. This was the same question that Lu Yiqing had asked in a trembling voice when he was blinded and in a panic. How could Ning Kei know divine skill? Who taught him divine skill? He Mingqi, who was standing beside him in silence, seemed to have heard the voice deep in his heart. He said softly, Ning Kei is a student of the headmaster of the academy. Then everything is possible. According to the records of the West Hill Divine Palace and the descriptions of the divine priests on the Peach Mountain, the headmaster of the academy seemed to be an omnipotent person. Cheng Lixue felt that this inference was valid, but vaguely felt that this matter was not so simple. He thought of the little girl he saw just now. The little girl standing under the shadow of the big green tree. Then he seemed to understand. Dawn is ahead, I will eat first. The next chapter will be out before 4:50. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 406. The West Hill Divine Skill was the most sacred and supreme Taoist magic of Haotian Taoism. It was even called the origin of Taoist magic. Different from the divine skill used by the deacons of the judicial department who patrolled the world, this divine skill was not a specific cultivation method, but a divine weapon given by Haotian to the cultivators. The disciples of Haotian Taoism who could practice the divine skills on Peach Mountain did not necessarily have the highest aptitude for comprehension, but they must have the purest Taoist heart and the strongest faith in Haotian. Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, was able to cultivate the divine skills because she had done these two things. Prince Longqing's faith in Haotian was firm enough, but he could not keep his Taoist heart clear because of the royal affairs of the Yan kingdom. So even he could not cultivate the real divine skills. For some reason, Cheng Lixue could not cultivate divine arts either. Therefore, he could not understand why Ning Kei could do it. Until he remembered the little girl who had been standing quietly under the big tree. He recognized the little girl because she was the reason and purpose why the great divine priest of Revelation led the West Hill Diplomatic Corps to Chang'an. So he thought he had guessed the truth. There was a courtyard deep in the wetland of the academy. Ning Kei and Chen Pippi stood on the bank of the wetland outside the courtyard. Perhaps it was because Tang Xiaotang was asked to practice by senior sister Yulian, Chen Pippi was silent. He lowered his head and stared blankly at the water plants in the wetland. After some time, he suddenly raised his head and said to Ning Kei, "That divine light came from the blade." Ning Kei knew what he wanted to express. After a moment of silence, he said, "Special Taoism?" Chin Pippi shook his head and said, "The West Hill divine skill is not like this." Ning Ke frowned slightly and said, "I used a divine talisman to inject Haotian's divine flame into the blade. That's why the divine flame came out of the blade when I waved it. What do you think of this explanation?" "Nothing much." Chin Pippi reminded him seriously, "In the beginning your blade was wrapped with the chi of heaven and earth. It's my first time. I don't have any experience." Ning Ke said sincerely, "There will be no such loopholes in the future." Chin Pippi mocked, "Do you really think you can deceive the world for a lifetime?" Ning Ke asked, "Even if they sense something wrong, who can find evidence for this?" Chin Pippi thought about it and shook his head. "Not really." Ning Ke relaxed and said, "That's good." Right at this moment, a shrill and miserable howl suddenly resounded in the courtyard, and then the howl came to an abrupt end. Silence ensued, and the two of them looked at each other before turning around and walking into the courtyard. In a secluded room in the courtyard, the old woman in the blue gown looked at Lu Yiqing, who was rolling on the bed in pain. She shook her head and put away the needles and other medical items in her hand, saying, "I can't do it anymore." Second brother nodded slightly and said, "Thank you." The door was pushed open, and Ning Ke and Chin Pippi walked in. Lu Yiqing gritted his teeth and endured the pain in his eyes. His left hand tightly gripped the wooden bar beside the bed and shouted, "What the hell do you want to do?" White bandages were wrapped around his injured eyes. Ning Ke looked at him and said, "You should be very clear." Hearing Ning Ke's voice, Lu Yiqing's face, which was not covered by the white bandages, revealed a vicious expression. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "You blinded my eyes today, and I will definitely pay you back in the future." Ning Ke had always been a person who refused to be at a disadvantage, whether it was in a sword fight or a verbal battle. Hearing this person threatening him, he said, "If you really want to take revenge, why wait until the future? You can kill me now because you know that I really want to kill you." Lu Yiqing did not expect that he would use words to express his killing intent. After a slight stiffening, he said in a cold voice, "My eldest brother is the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. How dare you kill me?" Cultivators paid attention to their state of mind and willpower. Once they started to reveal their background, except for people like Ning Ke who did not care about manners, most people would feel desperate or even collapse. However, Lu Yiqing did have some hope and confidence. The Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, was indeed too famous. Although the Academy would not be afraid of him, it seemed unnecessary to provoke the world's strongest powerhouse. At this time, second brother, who had been standing quietly, suddenly said, "Since you are Lu Bai's younger brother, the Academy will not treat you harshly. Please rest assured." Lu Yiqing knew that the owner of this voice must have a high status in the Academy. He might even be the rumored Mr. First or Mr. Second at the back of the mountain of the Academy. He sincerely said, "Thank you for your care." "You're welcome." He was not being polite, but because second brother was an upright gentleman and did not want to lie. Moreover, he did not think that what he had done was worthy of being thanked. He said, "Because I plan to let you stay in the Academy to recuperate." Lu Yiqing was stunned and asked with the last hope, "Then when are you willing to let me go?" Second brother thought for a moment and said honestly, "I will let you go when Lu Bai releases Cao Xiaoshu. If Cao Xiaoshu is dead, then you will never have to leave." Lu Yiqing heard the seriousness in second brother's words. The pain in his eyes and the fear of being imprisoned in the Academy made him even more panicked. He said anxiously, "Cao Xiaoshu is really not in the sword garret. He is not dead. Eldest brother is in seclusion, so I could only take his sword and hurt him." Then he ran away. Ning Ke finally knew that Cao Xiaoshu had met the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. Ning Ke finally knew that Cao Xiaoshu had indeed encountered the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. Naturally, he was no match for him. No wonder his sword was taken away. But how serious was his injury? Second brother suddenly asked, "How can you prove it?" The room was silent. Lu Yiqing said, Isn't it proof that Chao Xiaoshu is not in the sword garret? Second brother said, How can you prove that Chao Xiaoshu is not in the sword garret? How can you prove that he is still alive? Lu Yiqing thought that no one knew where Chao Xiaoshu was. How could he prove it? The more he thought, the more anxious he became. He said, How can the academy be so unreasonable? Second brother said calmly, A debt must be paid. A life must be paid for a life. A prisoner must be kept alive. You can only leave when Lu Bai can prove that Chao Xiaoshu is not with him and is still alive. The old woman in the blue coat said lightly, I will write a letter to Lu Bai and ask. Second brother was slightly stunned and said, Thank you. Walking out of the courtyard and to the wetland, Ning Kai could not suppress his curiosity. He wanted to ask second brother about the relationship between the old professor who liked to clean the academy and Lu Bai. Unexpectedly, second brother did not give him a chance to speak. He patted his shoulder with a smile and said, Not bad. Second brother had always been a serious and courteous person. He paid particular attention to filial piety and fraternity. He treated his teacher as warm as spring, eldest brother as warm as summer, younger brothers and sisters as cold as autumn, and his enemies as cold as winter. He rarely smiled or praised people like Ning Kai and the others. Therefore, looking at the smile on senior brother's face, hearing the two words, not bad, and feeling the strength from his shoulder, Ning Kai's legs gave way and he almost fell to the ground. He felt extremely comfortable. Chen Pippi pursed his lips enviously. Second brother turned around to look at Chen Pippi. The smile on his face had long disappeared. He said seriously, Although you entered the academy earlier than youngest brother and have a higher cultivation state, you are not as good as him in some aspects. As the saying goes, there is an order to understand the Tao. When you get the Tao, you have to forget your identity as senior brother and learn from him. Chen Pippi thought, When did you forget your identity as senior brother to learn from me? And what do I, a genius, need to learn from Ning Kai? Although he thought so in his heart, he showed a respectful expression and repeatedly agreed. Ning Kai asked a little unconfidently, Senior brother, what's good about me? Second brother looked at him with satisfaction and said, Finally, you told that person that one day, I will beat Lu Bai into a pile of dog shit. Such foresight and courage are very good. After a moment, Chen Pippi looked at second brother's back and said faintly, I thought you wanted me to learn something. It turns out that you just like to flatter me. Ning Kai patted his shoulder and comforted him. It's all knowledge, all knowledge. In Chang'an, the Southern Gate Temple in front of the Imperial City was as quiet as usual. However, compared to the past, the quietness of the Southern Gate Temple was more tense and somber today. There was no one walking in the beautiful Taoist temple complex, but in the streets outside the Taoist temple, there were many experts from the Tang military and the Imperial Center administration hiding. Recently, the defense of the Southern Gate Temple was even tighter than that of the Imperial Palace. It was not the Imperial Court's fault for being nervous. It was because the bigwig who lived in the Southern Gate Temple was too respected. If anything happened to the bigwig in the Tang Empire, the whole world would probably fall into the flames of war. The great divine priest of revelation of the West Hill Divine Palace lived here. In the Taoist temple deep in the Southern Gate Temple, an old man in a gorgeous divine robe sat in the depths of the dark wooden floor. His closed eyes were surrounded by wrinkles like dry land. Qing Lixue, the priest of the Revelation Department, knelt respectfully in front of the old man. When junior brother Long Qing was destroyed by him, the Divine Hall thought that it was because of the terrifying divine item provided by the Academy. Even when Monk Guan Hai and Dao Shi were defeated by him, no one thought that he was very strong. Qing Lixue organized the words in his heart. After a short pause, he continued respectfully, Today, I watched his battle with Lu Yiqing and confirmed that he should have entered the upper see-through state. Compared to when we met in the wilderness, His cultivation state is improving at a terrifying speed. The person who could make Qing Lixue so respectful was naturally the great divine priest of revelation. The great divine priest of revelation slowly opened his eyes. The deep wrinkles at the corners of his eyes gradually stretched out as he opened his eyes. It was like a dry land that was moistened by the spring rain for a night. The headmaster returned to the academy and can personally guide him. If his cultivation state still improves at the speed of an ordinary person, then it will be truly terrifying. The great divine priest of revelation looked at his disciple in front of him and asked, "But why is he able to cultivate the divine skill?" Qing Lixue said, "I am wondering if it has something to do with junior sister Sangsang." The great divine priest of revelation looked at him quietly and said, "How can you prove it?" "Actually, I am in a very bad state today because of some things. But when I wrote this chapter, I was very happy. When second brother said how to prove it, there is still one more chapter. I will continue. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 407. Qing Lixue shook his head after a moment of hesitation. The great divine priest of revelation recalled what had happened many years ago and said indifferently, "Then do you know that Mr. Ku from the academy once showed his divine skills to the world?" Qing Lixue was shocked speechless. He was already confused that there was someone else who could cultivate the divine skill other than the West Hill Divine Palace. He could barely accept what had happened to Ningke because of Sangsang. But now he heard from the great divine priest that someone in the academy had already mastered the divine skill many years ago. This was really unacceptable, even if that person was the legendary Mr. Ku. The great divine priest of revelation said, "Whether Ning Ke learned the West Hill divine skill from Sangsang or found the key from Mr. Ku's legacy, it made no difference to Haotian Taoism. But Mr. Ku's faith in Haotian can't be so firm. How could he cultivate the divine skill? If Ning Ke learned the divine skill from Mr. Ku, what is it exactly?" Qing Lixue said blankly, "Even if Ning Ke is Uncle Yen Sei's disciple, we still have to be more vigilant. What is faith? This is a very complicated question in itself. As for what is called firmness, that is something that only the great Hao Tian can judge for himself." The great divine priest of revelation said indifferently, "Your question is not the responsibility of the revelation department. It is a question of the judicial department. Write a letter to the West Hill later and let them handle it themselves." Qing Lixue nodded and thought of the message from the West Hill a few days ago. He frowned slightly and said, "I heard that the great divine priest of judgment has not recovered from his injury. Recently, his mood—" The great divine priest of revelation looked into his eyes and said, "The 3 departments of the divine hall each have their own responsibilities. You'd better stay away from the judicial department. Don't dirty yourself with that basin of dirty water." Qing Lixue heard this and asked in surprise, "I don't understand." The great divine priest of revelation looked at the dark floor in front of him, as if he was looking at the dark prison in the depths of Peach Mountain. He sighed and said, "When the judicial department instructed Qianguan Taoism to publicize Liu Bai's name, they wanted to make the sword Garrett angry. Today's battle at the gate of the academy started because of this. Even the key points were planned by the judicial department. However, these people who are used to conspiracies and violence never understand that this is a matter between the academy and Liu Bai. It is wrong for the divine hall to intervene. The more they do, the more mistakes they will make." It was only then that Qing Lixue realized that the West Hill Divine Palace had done something behind the scenes. The great divine priest of revelation lowered his eyes slightly, and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes deepened. He said slowly, "Senior brother Guang is gone, and I am old. Seeing that something big is about to happen in the judicial department, I feel a little uneasy." Qing Lixue asked nervously, "Since we already knew that something big was going to happen, why can't we stop it in advance?" The great divine priest of revelation raised his head and looked at him lovingly. He said, "You have followed me for more than 20 years, and you have been in the revelation department for a long time. Don't you know that the so-called revelation is just an order from heaven? We may know some things in advance, but that is what Haotian wants us to know. Stop it in advance? Wouldn't that be against heaven? What's more, the event of the judicial department might not be a bad thing for the divine hall." The Jisho Abbey was an unknown place. Not many people knew of the existence of this dilapidated Taoist temple. Even those who knew of the existence of the Jisho Abbey did not know that this Taoist abbey, which was high up in the clouds of Haotian Taoism, was in a deep mountain not far from Peach Mountain, quietly looking at the magnificent and solemn Taoist temples. In the first thatched hut by the lake behind the Taoist temple. The lake breeze blew through the window again, opened the cover of the hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane, and stopped on a certain page. The middle-aged Taoist by the table looked at the name on the page in silence. The middle-aged Taoist had been in charge of the Tomes of Arcane for many years, but he had never seen such a thing happen on the hand scroll. 3 months ago the name disappeared. Yesterday that name appeared again, but it did not appear in its original place. Instead, it was flipped by the lake wind. Sometimes it appeared on the previous page, and sometimes it appeared on the next page. It did not stop until it finally returned to the first page, but its position had changed. The name suddenly appeared on the top of the book from an inconspicuous corner, like a firework rising from the wilderness, and was about to touch the sky in an instant. From the lower see-through state, you are about to see the threshold of the knowing destiny state. The headmaster of the academy is really amazing. The middle-aged Taoist looked at the restless name and said with a smile, "I have been in charge of the Tomes of Arcane for many years. Your speed of improvement can be ranked in the top 5, but your elusiveness is definitely the first." Not far away, the name of Prince Long Qing was as faint as usual, but the last stroke of the word Qing seemed to be thicker than before, as if someone had added a stroke of ink. The middle-aged Taoist did not notice the change of Prince Long Qing's name. All his attention was on the restless name. Then, he looked up at the top of the Tomes of Arcane and nodded with satisfaction. The name Yi Hong Yu was hanging there, as if it could break out of the paper at any time. It looked extremely aloof and arrogant, leaving all the other names on the page far behind. Between the cliffs of the Peach Mountain of West Hill that seemed to have been split by a divine axe, there was a Taoist temple made of countless huge black rock. A green figure stood quietly at the stone steps in front of the temple, looking extremely small. After returning from the wilderness, it was unknown whether it was because she was tired of the blood-like red, or because she wanted to cover the 2 horrible wounds on her shoulders. Yi Hong Yu was no longer wearing the beautiful bright red dress. Instead, she wore a loose green Taoist robe like the lowliest Taoist servant in the Divine Hall. The deacons of the judicial department of the Divine Hall looked at her in front of the temple with complicated expressions. There were despise, sadness, pity, mockery, disdain, and anger. Most of them were negative emotions. In the past, she was the Grand Master of the Judicial Department and above all others. She was the Tao addict who was praised by the entire Haotian Taoism. She was proud and indifferent. Although she handed over the specific affairs of the Judicial Department to Prince Long Qing to handle, she would not show mercy when her subordinate deacons made a mistake. At that time, everyone in the Judicial Department was in awe of her because of her coldness and strength. But now, everyone knew that the Tao addict was no longer the Tao addict of the past. She was no longer powerful, so she was no longer cold. Therefore, no one was in awe of her anymore. They even deliberately looked at her with mockery because of some kind of emotion. For the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane, the West Hill Divine Palace had invested a lot of manpower in the wilderness last year. The specific affairs were handled by the Judicial Department. In other words, it was Yi Hong Yu who was in charge. The Judicial Department had planned for a long time, but in the end they failed miserably. From the commander of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall to the strange disappearance of the two black deacons, the destruction of Prince Long Qing, and the failure to snatch the tomes of arcane, the judicial department, which used to be cold and powerful, actually seemed so weak. No one in the Divine Hall cared about the fight for the Ming hand-scroll of the tomes of arcane. In the end, it had long been out of the scope of cultivation power in the world. It had evolved into a story among the world wayfarers of the Academy and other unknown places. Now Yi Hongyu was not qualified to participate in that level of battle. She should not participate in that level of battle. Everyone thought that since Yi Hongyu was the Grand Master of the Judicial Department, then the failure was her responsibility. The West Hill Divine Palace believed in the light of Haotian. However, the Taoism Hall was not necessarily completely bright, especially when the Judicial Department walked in the dark and worshipped power the most. Therefore, as long as Yi Hongyu was still the powerful Tao addict of the West Hill Divine Palace, then these things would not affect her at all. The problem was that Yi Hongyu herself had a problem. During the trip to the wilderness, she met the terrifying Master Lotus at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He used the practice of Taotai to devour her flesh and blood. At the moment of life and death, she used the secret method of Haotian Taoism to forcefully lower her state in exchange for a moment of powerful brilliance. Finally, she joined hands with Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan to walk back from the brink of death. However, she had just entered the knowing destiny state in the snow cliff. Before her state had stabilized, she forcefully lowered her state again, which caused an even more terrifying counterattack. Since leaving the wilderness, her state had been constantly falling, and she could not even stay at the upper see-through state. According to the current trend, she might fall to the lower see-through state or even lower levels before her cultivation could finally stabilize. What was more terrifying was that she might not have any hope of returning to the knowing destiny state in this lifetime. If the Tao addict was no longer powerful, would she still be the Tao addict? The people of the Judicial Department, who respected power, naturally did not respect her as they used to. However, Yi Hongyu became more and more silent and calm in the face of the changes in her body. She moved into a quiet and remote stone house, as if she wanted to send a message to everyone by doing so. However, the more she did so, the more people felt that she was no longer qualified to be respected. The people in the West Hill Divine Palace looked at her with more and more complicated expressions. The ridicule in many people's eyes became more and more obvious. There was even a saying in the Judicial Department: Prince Long Qing was dead, and so was the Tao addict. The girl in green standing in front of the hall was just a good-for-nothing named Yi Hongyu. A deacon walked out of the judicial temple and gently invited her in. Yi Hongyu nodded slightly and then calmly walked into the Black Taoist temple. The interior of the Black Taoist temple was spacious, and there was a curtain woven from pearls and jade in the deepest part. Yi Hongyu walked very slowly, and it took her a long time to reach the curtain. Behind the curtain was the divine throne carved from a whole piece of South Sea ink jade. The color of the jade was like solidified blood. The great divine priest of judgment sat on the divine throne with her hand on her forehead. She seemed to be resting and did not speak. Yi Hongyu stood quietly outside the curtain and did not speak either. There was not even a trace of wind in the spacious Taoist temple. The silence continued. She understood something. Then, she slowly lifted the front of her green Taoist robe and knelt in front of the great divine priest of judgment. Everyone in the judicial department had to kneel before the great divine priest of judgment to show their obedience and respect. In the past, only the Tao addict could not kneel because she was proud and powerful. But she was not the Tao addict now, so she had to kneel, and she had to kneel more respectfully than others. Blowing kisses. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 408. I recommend a new book, The Spear Breaks the World, book number 234-6448. The author, Yang Jialong, once participated in the book review contest of the coming night. He wrote the coming night finale and won the second prize. Please support him. The great divine priest of judgment, who was sitting on the black jade throne, slowly opened his eyes and looked at the girl kneeling outside the curtain. His face was expressionless, but his eyes seemed to hide many complicated emotions. After a long time, the great divine priest of judgment said coldly, "Although you have become a useless person now, I hope you still have your vision." The voice was slightly hoarse, calm and elegant, but there was a hint of violence that could not be hidden. It directly shook the bead curtain in front of the throne. The clear sound echoed in the empty Taoist hall, like a rainstorm falling into an empty porcelain bowl. Yi Hongyu quietly knelt in front of the curtain. She was not moved by the noise and the power contained in the voice. She just lowered her head and appeared more respectful. A deacon from the judicial department came out from behind the curtain with a file in his hand. He walked to her, smiled gently and comforted her, and then handed the file to her. Yi Hongyu took the scroll quietly. She did not get up and continued to kneel. She carefully read the contents of the scroll, and then fell into a long period of thought. The file was sent back to the West Hill by the Divine Hall's diplomatic corps to the Tang Empire. The writer was Priest Qing Lixue of the Revelation Department. The content of the file was a detailed description of the battle between Ning Ke and Lu Yiqing at the side door of the academy. The focus of the description was, of course, on the divine skill that Ning Ke revealed at the end. "You have seen that person. What do you think?" The cold and solemn voice of the great divine priest of judgment sounded again from behind the bead curtain. Yi Hongyu listened quietly to the sound of the bead curtains hitting against each other. She said slowly, "Ning Ke's cultivation state is so fast that it has exceeded my expectations. As for the divine skill that the Revelation Department thought of, it seems to me that it is just a facade. Because according to the details, the Haotian divine flame that Ning Ke condensed from the qi of heaven and earth should have burst out from within the blade and not from nature." There was a dead silence in the Taoist hall. Through the details of the file, Yi Hongyu had some doubts about the real means of Ning Ke's knife. This doubt pointed to a very shocking fact, so there was a silence. After a long time, the great divine priest of judgment asked in a low voice, "Are you sure?" Yi Hongyu shook her head and said, "Back then, Mr. Ku had also shown his divine skills to the world. Furthermore, since Ning Ke's handmaiden had become a disciple of the divine priest of light, no one would suspect him without evidence. Even if they did, they would not be able to tell the world about it." The great divine priest of judgment looked at her, who was kneeling in front of him expressionlessly. Yi Hongyu calmly said, "I can do." The great divine priest of judgment looked at the girl's tranquil expression and felt a sense of impatience in his chest. He said angrily, "Then what is the use of you?" Yi Hongyu said after a moment of silence, "At least you have good taste." A deep, thunderous cough suddenly sounded from behind the bead curtain and could not be stopped. After a long time, the great divine priest of judgment stopped coughing and looked at her coldly through the bead curtain. He said, "Your body has been polluted by that devil, Lotus. You need to be purified. It is a good choice to choose the stone housed to practice hard and hide from the world. During this time, don't bother with the affairs of the department." Yi Hongyu knew very well that the great divine priest's simple words were equivalent to stripping her of her position as the Grand Master of the Judicial Department. In fact, ever since she returned from the wilderness, she had lived in seclusion in the stone house and rarely cared about the affairs of the Judicial Department. However, ignoring and being deprived of the right to care were two different things. Now her strength was seriously damaged, and her realm had fallen to the middle level of see-through, and it was still going down. If even the position of the priest of the Judicial Department no longer existed, then the people in the Divine Hall who had suffered countless hardships in front of her might turn those mocking and contemptuous eyes into real actions. Yi Hongyu knelt in front of the great god's throne and remained silent. The great divine priest of judgment leaned back tiredly and supported his forehead with his hand. He looked at the girl outside the curtain with a trace of boredom and mockery in his deep eyes. As a giant of the divine hall, he absolutely could not accept that someone tried to maintain pride in front of the great god and refused to kneel down humbly. In the past years, because of Yi Hongyu's talent, the hierarch appreciated her, and he also thought highly of her. Together with the person in the temple, he could calmly watch her pride and even support her pride. But now, since she did not have the right to be proud, then let her be silent. I have written a letter to the temple about this matter. Your brother expressed his gratitude to me for handling it. The great divine priest of judgment looked at the girl outside the curtain indifferently, shattering her last psychological dependence. Sure enough, after hearing this, Yi Hongyu's expression became a little gloomy. Her body trembled slightly, and her eyebrows were full of self-mockery and disappointment. She was like a seemingly hard egg that finally had its thin outer shell broken, revealing the fragile inside. After an unknown amount of time, she seemed to finally wake up. A sad smile appeared on her face as she bowed to the god behind the bead curtain and said, "All these years, it is all thanks to the god's protection that I have today. Please allow this disciple to thank you for your great kindness." The great divine priest of judgment frowned and looked at the girl who bowed in front of the curtain. He suddenly felt that his decision seemed to be a little hasty. He always felt that the sad smile on the girl's lips, and the words that sounded a little desperate and sad, hid some meaning that he did not understand. After bowing, Yi Hongyu slowly stood up. Just before leaving, she looked at the great god on the black jade seat behind the curtain and said softly, "This is between the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom and the Academy. I think it is better for the judicial department not to interfere, even though this is something to be said after the fact." The great divine priest of judgment looked at her and suddenly coughed painfully again. He sternly scolded, "It is not terrible that your state has fallen. It is terrible that your Taoist heart is so timid. The West Hill Divine Palace rules the world, and the judicial department enforces the rules. Who dares to question this?" Yi Hongyu said no more and walked out of the Black Taoist temple. Standing at the top of the high stone steps outside the Taoist temple, she looked at the smoke in the fields outside the Peach Mountain. After a moment of silence, she suddenly sighed and said, "Someone is going to die again." The deacon who had handed her the dossier had accompanied her all the way to the outside of the Taoist temple. At this time, he was standing quietly beside her. Hearing her lament, he could not help but lament too. He whispered, "The great divine priest has been suffering from colds recently. He has been coughing badly and has a bad temper. Please do not take it to heart, priest. As for the sword garret, those who deserve to die will die." As the most powerful and terrifying great divine priest of the West Hill Divine Palace, he had already entered the knowing destiny state. He sat on the clouds and looked at the world as if he was an ant. Such a person had long been immune to all diseases. How could he catch a cold? How could he cough? If he didn't cough, how could he be grumpy? Yi Hongyu looked at the deacons of the judicial department who were looking at her mockingly and pitifully. She suddenly said sympathetically, "It is not easy to recover from being injured by the divine priest of light." The West Hill Divine Palace had a hierarch lord and 3 great divine priests. No matter if the person sitting on the great divine priest was old, sick, injured, or imprisoned, as long as he was alive, he would be the great divine priest worshipped by millions of people in the world. Sometime last year, the great divine priest of light, who had been imprisoned in the U prison for more than 10 years, rebelled and escaped. Then he died together with Master Yen Sei on a nameless mountain on the outskirts of Chang'an. There was an empty great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace. The great divine priest was waiting for someone else. The West Hill Divine Palace could not allow this situation to continue for too long. Therefore, when they knew that the great divine priest of light had left a successor in the world, the Divine Hall urgently needed to bring that successor back to the West Hill. This matter was still in a state of secrecy for the time being. If the people outside of the Divine Hall knew about this, they would probably have some doubt. Why did the people in the West Hill Divine Palace still choose the successor of the former Divine Priest of Light to take over the position of the Divine Priest of Light, even though he had betrayed the sect and brought great harm to the Divine Hall? But for the people in the West Hill Divine Palace, this matter was very natural. Because the great Divine Priest of Light who rebelled was still the great Divine Priest of Light. More importantly, for countless years, the inheritance of the three great Divine Priests of Peach Mountain had never been decided by the Hierarch or the great Divine Priest, but by Haotian. The inheritance of the three great Divine Priests of Peach Mountain followed different paths. The inheritance of the great Divine Priest of Judgment was a choice made by Haotian through the Judgment of Power. The inheritance of the great Divine Priest of Revelation was a choice made by Haotian through the Revelation of Prophecy. The inheritance of the great Divine Priest of Light was a choice made by Haotian through the Continuation of Light. The dying great Divine Priest of Light found his successor in Chang'an. This must be the will of Haotian. Then that successor must be the future great Divine Priest of Light. Especially after the news from the South Sea, the Hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and the great Divine Priest of Revelation became more and more confident. They did not hesitate to let the great Divine Priest of Light wait for the return of its true master. In the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street, Ning Ke looked at Cheng Lixue in front of him and kept silent for a long time. In the Right King's Palace of the Wilderness, he had once met the priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Hall. In that dispute, Cheng Lixue's calm and even fair performance left a good impression on him. But today, looking at the silver-white hair of Cheng Lixue, he felt very uncomfortable. Because Cheng Lixue was a bigwig in the West Hill Divine Palace, but his attitude was so sincere and even humble. Especially when Sang Sang served tea, Cheng Lixue's respectful look made Ning Ke easily have an illusion that this guy was his and Sang Sang's future son. Ning Ke picked up the teacup on the table and thought for a moment. He said, "I roughly understand the ins and outs of this matter, but I really can't promise you anything." Cheng Lixue looked at him quietly and suddenly frowned. He said, "Although there have been some misunderstandings between the Divine Hall and the Academy these years, we still respect each other." Ning Ke said, "I respect Haotian Taoism very much." Cheng Lixue sighed and said, "Junior sister Sang Sang will be the Divine Priest of Light of the Divine Hall in the future. Including me, hundreds of millions of Haotian believers in the world have to kneel in front of her and dare not speak or look at her. But Mr. 13, you let her make the bed and serve tea here. Then where is the respect for Haotian Taoism? My state has fallen, but I can't be weak. I'll write another chapter. The update time must be very late. I don't know when I can write it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 409. Hearing this, Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang, who was cooking in the backyard. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and said, "To be honest, I still feel that the whole thing is ridiculous. I watched her grow from a little girl to a little girl. I know she has something special about her, but I didn't expect it to be so special that it could alarm the West Hill Divine Palace." Cheng Lixue said, "Even if younger sister Sang Sang is an extremely ordinary person, she is no longer ordinary since Haotian chose her through the Divine Priest of Light. And we will definitely carry out Haotian's will and bring her back to the Divine Hall." "I don't like to hear such words and tone." Ning Ke looked at the teacup in his hand and said after a moment of silence, "Because it makes me feel that you are threatening me. It makes me feel that you are trying to take her away from me." Cheng Lixue looked at him quietly and said, "You can understand it from another perspective." Ning Ke took a sip of the cold tea and said mockingly, "Since you are determined to bring her back, how can I understand it? If I don't agree, will you just give up?" Cheng Lishua shook his head. The divine priest of light can't be without a leader all the time. Ning Ke put down the teacup and looked into his eyes. If I insist on not agreeing, what will the divine hall do? Cheng Lishua heard the toughness in his words. After a moment of silence, he said with a smile, "You should know what the divine priest of light means to the entire Haotian Taoism and the West Hill Divine Palace." "I'm not sure." Ning Ke still stared into his eyes and asked, "Even at the cost of a war?" Cheng Lishua looked at him with a smile and said calmly, "If the successor of the divine priest of light is somewhere else in the world, the divine hall will find her even at the cost of the world's blood." Ning Ke said, "Since you said it's somewhere else, then you and the bigwigs in the divine hall must know that Sang Sang is now in Chang and by my side." Cheng Lishua said after a moment of silence, "So I am here to ask younger sister Sang Sang to go back." "The word please sounds better," Ning Ke said, "but I want to know how determined the divine hall is." Cheng Lishua frowned slightly and said, "Do you want to know if the divine hall will declare war on the Tang Empire because of this? Declare war on the Academy? Do you think the Tang Empire and the Academy will go to war with the divine hall because of junior sister Sang Sang?" Ning Ke thought of the bloodshed in Chang, and many years ago, and General Xiahou, who was still alive and well. After a long silence, he shook his head and said, "The Empire and the Academy will not start a war with the divine hall over a little girl. But if you really want to take her away from me, I can tell you clearly that the Empire and the Academy will be involved in this war." Cheng Lishua's face turned cold. It was not until now that he realized that junior sister Sang Sang was not as simple as a handmaiden whom he had been with for many years. It was also until now that he realized that Ning Ke really had the determination and ruthlessness to let the world flood for junior sister Sang Sang. "Why should the Tang Empire and the Academy go to war with the Divine Hall because of your insolence?" he sternly reprimanded. "Are the headmaster of the Academy and the Emperor of the Tang Empire shameless people like you who would not hesitate to cause chaos in the world for your own selfish desires?" Ning Ke's expression did not change. He looked at him and said, "Don't forget who I am. If that day really comes, I have enough ways to drag the Academy and the Empire into this mess." There was silence in the old brush pen shop. Cheng Lishua looked at him and said with a bitter smile, "Why can't you imagine it better? Junior sister Sang Sang is not going to the West Hill to be a prisoner or to suffer. On the contrary, she will receive the most perfect education from Haotian Taoism and become the most honorable divine priest of light on Peach Mountain. There is no harm in this for the Tang Empire, the Academy, or you. So why do we have to fight? Is it really because of his own selfish desires that he does not want Sang Sang to go to the West Hill Divine Palace, that he does not want Sang Sang to become the great divine priest of light, and that he wants her to serve him for the rest of her life?" Ning Ke looked at the remaining tea in the cup and fell into a long silence. Then he suddenly raised his head and said, "Let me think about it." Cheng Lishua looked into his eyes and said seriously, "The great divine priest of revelation cannot stay in Chang and for long. I hope you can think about it seriously and not use it as an excuse to fool me." That night, Ning Ke brought Sang Sang to the Grand Secretary's mansion. Mrs. Zheng was overjoyed to see her daughter whom she had not seen for a few days. She held her daughter's hand and walked into the backyard, leaving the quiet study room to Ning Ke and the Grand Secretary. "What are your thoughts on this matter, my lord?" Ning Ke asked seriously. He wanted to find some spiritual support from her expression, such as a parent's reluctance to part with their daughter, but in the next moment, he realized that it was just wishful thinking. Grand Secretary Xingjing's face showed some reluctance, but he was more excited and at a loss after the extreme surprise. For the believers of Haotian in the world, even if they were citizens of the Tang Empire, it would be a great honor to suddenly find out that their daughter could become the great divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace. "I'm thinking if I should go back to my hometown and rebuild the ancestral hall. If it weren't for the blessings of my ancestors in heaven, how could my family have such a grand event? Speaking of rebuilding the ancestral hall, even the rules have to be changed. Although there are no clear rules in the laws of the Tang Empire, according to the old rules set by the great divine priest of Westhill from the Chui family of Qinghe Prefecture more than 100 years ago, the ancestral hall of the Xing family can be compared to the rules set by the princes. Grand Secretary Xing Jing's face was full of joy, and he said in a trembling voice, "This is still within the territory of the Tang Empire, where the imperial power is supreme. If it were in the South Jin Kingdom or the Kingdom of Song, we could even rebuild the ancestral hall according to the imperial system. Mr. 13, how could I be so lucky?" Suddenly, he noticed Ning Kei's silence, and he smiled embarrassedly and said, I forgot myself. But at least I am better than the clan leader of the Chui family of Qinghe Prefecture. It is said that when the news of the Westhill choosing the great divine priest reached Qinghe Prefecture, the clan leader was so surprised that he became a fool. Ning Kei smiled bitterly and said, "Is it really that good to be the great divine priest of Westhill?" Xing Jing was stunned, and his face was full of surprise. He thought that as a core disciple of the headmaster of academy, how could he ask such an absurd and even retarded question? For the people of the world, being the great divine priest of Westhill was more perfect than being an emperor. If this was not good, then what other good things could there be in the world? Xing Jing suddenly came to his senses, and he looked at him in disbelief and said, "You don't want Sang Sang to go to Westhill?" Ning Kei was silent for a long time, and then he said, "It's not that I don't want to, it's just that I haven't thought about it yet." Xing Jing said in a trembling voice, "Mr. 13, you saved my daughter from a difficult situation and have taken good care of her all these years. I am very grateful for that. I also know that the relationship between you and my daughter is not an ordinary master and servant. However, please consider this matter carefully and don't make a rash decision." Ning Kei did not say anything. Xing Jing thought of a possibility, but he felt that it was unlikely. He tugged at his beard and hesitated for a long time, and then he lowered his voice and said tentatively, "I heard that the canon does not allow the great divine priest to marry or marry." Ning Kei suddenly raised his head and looked at him, asking, "Really?" Xing Jing looked at Ning Kei's eyes that suddenly brightened, and he was startled, thinking that his wife's guess was true? Thinking that his guess might be true, Xing Jing suddenly forgot that Ning Kei was a student of the second floor of the academy, and subconsciously put on the airs of an elder. He stroked his beard and frowned, asking, "If Sang Sang doesn't go to Westhill, how will Mr. 13 arrange for my poor daughter in the future?" Ning Kei did not notice the change in his expression, and said, "I will marry her when she is over 16. Xing Jing's fingers that were stroking his beard trembled, and 3 strands of beard fell off. He was waiting for Ning Kei to speak, and then he would argue with him. But he did not expect that Ning Kei would say that he would marry Sang Sang without any hesitation or concealment. "Wife?" Xing Jing asked in a trembling voice. Ning Kei shook his head. Xing Jing was slightly angry. Ning Kei shook his head and said, "Of course it's a wife. How can it be a crooked one?" Xing Jing relaxed a lot and asked with a smile, "Will you take a concubine?" Ning Kei said bitterly, "I want to, but do you think it's possible?" Xing Jing's smile grew wider. His daughter might marry the core disciple of the headmaster of academy, and Ning Kei had promised not to take a concubine. With such a future, it would not be a pity if he did not become the great divine priest of Westhill. In that case, it's up to you whether Sang Sang goes to Westhill or not. Xing Jing, the Grand Secretary, had always been a very decisive person. Otherwise, he would not have directly divorced his wife and killed her servant after Sang Sang was killed by his wife, even with the pressure from the Empress. Therefore, after hearing Ning Kei's words and thinking about the pros and cons of the 2 choices, he did not hesitate to remove himself and his wife from this matter, and put all the pressure on Ning Quebec. Ning Kei said painfully, "Shouldn't we discuss this kind of thing?" Xing Jing stroked his slightly painful chin, and said while shaking his head, Sang Sang is still in Mr. Ning's household register, and you two have a deep relationship. In terms of emotion and reason, Mr. Ning should also make the decision. Ning Ke suddenly realized that his future father-in-law was not someone who could be easily fooled. Xing Jing looked at him and sneered, "Don't think that you can fool me and refuse the request of the West Hill Divine Palace just because you are a student of the second floor of the academy." The night was getting late. Mrs. Xing walked out of the backyard with Sang Sang, and her face was full of reluctance. Xing Jing pulled his wife aside and whispered a few words to her. Mrs. Xing covered her mouth and was slightly shocked. When she looked at Ning Ke again, the look in her eyes was very different from before, and it was extremely loving. "I thought that Mr. Ning would come often in the future, so I ordered someone to prepare a guest room in the backyard." Mrs. Xing looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, "Why don't you rest here tonight?" Ning Ke suddenly felt that he had walked into the world of strange stories, and he had the urge to run away. "I have an urgent matter to attend to later." He stood up and asked Sang Sang to spend more time with his parents in the Grand Secretary's mansion, and then he left. He went to the 2nd Street of Spring Breeze Pavilion. Chao Xiaoshu's house was on this street. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 410. Chi 4 had been waiting outside the Chao mansion. Seeing that Ning Ke had finally appeared, he let out a sigh of relief and led him into the mansion, whispering the latest situation along the way. It was already late at night, but the hall of the Chao mansion was still brightly lit. Several people sat silently in the hall, and the atmosphere was somewhat depressing. When they looked at the old master sitting at the head of the table, they would always have a gentle smile on their faces, but the smile seemed a little forced. Chi 4 led Ning Ke into the hall. Everyone stood up, cupped their fists, bowed and introduced themselves. Chong San, Chong Siwei. Lu Wu, Lu Si. Fei Lu, Fei Jingwei. Chen 7. The people in the Chao mansion today were all former leaders of the Fish Dragon Gang. After the Spring Breeze Pavilion case, their identities were exposed, and they could only leave the Fish Dragon Gang and return to the Imperial Court. Now, they had important positions in the Valiant Cavalry Battalion and the Bodyguard Office. Everyone was gathered here for that matter. Before Chao Xiaoshu left Chang'an, he had specially brought his brothers to Lin 47th Street to let Ning Ke meet them. Ning Ke knew the identity of these people. From the perspective of the secret guards, they were considered colleagues, so it was not strange for them to appear here. Chong San and the others looked at Ning Ke with a complicated expression. Before Chao Xiaoshu left, he had vaguely intended to entrust them and the Fish Dragon Gang to Ning Ke, but Ning Ke did not accept. They had always been puzzled about this, and did not understand why Chao Xiaoshu trusted him so much. However, 2 years had passed in a flash, and Ning Ke had long become a celebrity in Chang'an. Only then did they realize that second brother Chao had long seen through this man's extraordinary abilities. "This is Old Master Chao," Chi 4 introduced. Ning Ke looked at the white-haired old man, who had a worried expression on his face. For some reason, he felt a little annoyed. He frowned and said, "He should not travel far with his parents around, but he does travel happily and freely." Old Master Chao sighed and explained for his son, "In the beginning, I wanted him to take the scholarly exams, and then I wanted him to seek an official position. I've restrained him for half his life. Now that he finally has a chance to get rid of all this, let him go." Ning Ke was slightly taken aback. He did not expect Old Master Chao to be so open-minded. He also thought about how Chao Xiaoshu had been the emperor of the underworld in Chang'an for many years. Old Master Chao, who came from a family of scholars, did not care about him at all. He thought that Old Master Chao was a smart person who had ideas but was not good at giving them. After figuring this out, he no longer had to hide from the old man. He looked at the people around him and said, "I have interrogated the South Jin Kingdom Sword Master. Second brother Chao must have fought with Lu Bai. There was a burst of exclamations in the hall. Chang Siwei's face was full of worry. They had gone through thick and thin with Chao Xiaoshu for many years and had a kind of almost foolish confidence in him. However, when they heard that the person who attacked was really the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, they could not help but feel shocked and at a loss. The sage was the most powerful man in the world. Of Chao Xiaoshu. And was, and how? Of Chao. Of. Ch Ning Ke said, Lu Yiqing doesn't know the exact result of that battle. Chao Xiaoshu's sword was taken away, so he must have been seriously injured. But we don't know where he is now. Chi Fo scratched his head and said in a distressed tone, with second brother Chao's personality, he definitely wouldn't do something so stupid. What we need to confirm now is how serious his injuries are. Is he hiding in a small village, or is he imprisoned by the South Jin Kingdom? Not in the Sword Pavilion. Ning Ke looked at the crowd and said, Lu Yiqing would not dare to lie about this, because the Academy will keep him imprisoned until we find Chao Xiaoshu. Besides, the Academy has already sent a letter to the Sword Garret to ask Lu Bai. Although the people present used to be famous in the underworld of Chang, and were now important figures in the imperial court, they did not know much about the world of cultivators and did not know how to deal with it. When they heard Ning Ke's words and knew that the Academy would personally come forward, they immediately felt relieved. Chang San added, His Majesty also knows about this. Tomorrow, he will write an official letter to the King of the South Jin Kingdom to ask for Chao Xiaoshu. I think the people of the South Jin Kingdom will consider it carefully. Chen 7 had been standing silently in the corner, hiding behind the crowd. It seemed that he was not used to being seen by so many people. Suddenly, he said, I think there is something wrong with this. Everyone looked at him, including Ning Quebec. Ning Ke had noticed that when everyone introduced themselves, only Chen 7 did not. At the same time, he remembered the description of the Fish Dragon Gang in Chang An's Jianghu world. Chang 3 was cold, Chi 4 was ruthless, Lu Vi was vicious, Fei 6 was vicious, and Chen 7 was sinister. How sinister was Chen 7? The Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, attacked second brother Chao probably because he was eager to hunt, or because he wanted to suppress the Tang Empire's momentum, or because second brother Chao ate a grain from the Sword Garret. Chen 7 lowered his head and spoke slowly as if he could not feel the crowd's gaze. Although what he said was funny, his voice was as gloomy as a mouse in the shadows. That is not important. The important thing is, why did Lu Yiqing challenge the Academy? Why did he take second brother Chao's sword, and why did he want everyone to know about this? I am not a cultivator, and I don't know what cultivators usually think. But I think that, if cultivators are still human, then their way of thinking is no different from us ordinary people. Ning Ke nodded and said, I can prove that. Chen 7 slowly raised his head, and his small eyes shone with a dim light. Lu Bai is the most powerful man in the world, so he cannot be an idiot. It is possible for him to send his own brother to humiliate the Academy. Even if he loses, he can use the Academy to sharpen his brother's cultivation. It is also possible for him to punish second brother Chao and you for the disciple who died in the hands of the two of you in Spring Breeze Pavilion 2 years ago. But I don't think he will think that it is feasible to take second brother Chao's sword and make you think that second brother Chao is dead, so that his own brother will become blind. Ning Ke was silent. He recalled the battle at the side gate of the Academy and confirmed that what Chen 7 said made sense. If he had not seen Chao Xiaoshu's sword in Lu Yiqing's hand, he would not have chosen to attack so fiercely. It was not good for him to blind the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai's brother. If I were Lu Bai, I would first defeat second brother Chao, who had entered the knowing destiny state, and then let my brother defeat Ning Quebec. That would be enough to make up for what happened in Spring Breeze Pavilion. There is no need for me to make the Academy and the Tang Empire a mortal enemy. Chen 7 continued softly, According to the intelligence of the bodyguard office, when you entered the second floor of the academy, your name immediately spread throughout the cultivation world. Even though we are not cultivators, we all know that your name is in the tomes of Arcane, and many details of the Spring Breeze Pavilion case have also been spread. The natural speed of transmission of information is definitely not that fast. At that time, there was already someone behind the scenes adding fuel to the fire. They wanted the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom to focus on second brother Chao and you. Then I believe that there was also someone behind these two incidents. Lu Yiqing holding second brother Chao's sword is one of them. Chun Seven looked at everyone calmly and said, "There is only one place in the world that has the ability and courage to provoke the relationship between the Tang Academy and the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom, and also has the right to benefit from this matter. That is the West Hill Divine Palace. Outside the capital of South Jin Kingdom, there was an ancient black and white pavilion on the cliff. It was called the Sword Garret. The building of the Sword Garret led into the cliff. It was a big, quiet cave. The top of the cave reached the peak and sunlight shone through. At the bottom of the cave there was a green pond and a thatched hut. It was like a small world of its own. Lu Bai sat in his own small world and looked at the fine bubbles spurting out by the blind fish in the green pond. He slowly reached out and pushed his long hair behind his back. He asked indifferently, "Who can give me an explanation?" The news of Lu Yiqing's defeat in the academy and his blindness had already spread to the South Jin Kingdom. Along with this news came 2 letters from the Tang Empire. One of the letters was written by the Tang Emperor himself, and it was now in the bedchamber of the King of South Jin Kingdom. The king was extremely angry, but also extremely helpless. The other letter was written by an old woman in the academy. It was now quietly placed beside Lu Bai's legs. The seal had been cut, and he had probably already read it. Beside the green pond, more than 10 important second-generation disciples of the Sword Garret knelt. When they heard their master's question, they lowered their heads in silence, and did not know how to answer. Lu Yiqing had been defeated in a direct challenge. How could they explain this? Lu Bai looked at the green pond in front of him and said expressionlessly, "My own brother has become a blind man. Who can give me an explanation for this?" A disciple of the Sword Garret said indignantly, "The academy is too ruthless. We must what? Revenge? Why do we need revenge?" Lu Bai said coldly, "Swordsmanship is about the spirit and boldness of advancing forward. Since I wanted him to defeat and kill Ning Ke, then it was natural that he would be defeated and killed by Ning Quebec. Moreover, I wanted him to go to the academy to seek defeat so that he could cleanse his sword heart." The disciples were shocked speechless. Only then did they realize that their master had already expected Lu Yiqing to lose. Lu Bai glanced at the letter beside him and said in a cold voice, "I just don't understand. I asked Yiqing to cleanse his own sword, but why did he bring Chao Xiaoshu's sword?" Everything about the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, was a sword, whether it was his loose black hair, the belt around his waist, the slightly swaying sleeves, his eyes, his back view, or his voice. When his voice became colder, the disciples of the Sword Garret beside the pond seemed to see a divine sword slowly being pulled out of the ice. Their eyes were pierced by the sharp sword style, and they began to tear up immediately. The disciples were terrified and kneeled on the ground, trembling and not daring to say a word. Lu Bai slowly turned around and looked at the disciples beside the pond coldly. He said, "My brother is an idiot in everything except swordsmanship. Because of his idiocy, he didn't even think of a way to provoke Ning Ke with Chao Xiaoshu's sword. Then who helped him think of it?" There was dead silence in the cliff cave behind the Sword Garret. After a long time, one of the disciples who was kneeling beside the pond slowly straightened up. Then he stood up and took 2 steps towards the pond. He bowed deeply but did not speak. Lu Bai looked at this disciple and said coldly, "Is the judicial department better than the Sword Garret?" There is one more chapter. It was written before 1130. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 4:11. The blind fish in the little green pond were still spitting bubbles. The yellow grass by the pond was still yellow and weak. They were like the companions in the hut. Hearing Lu Bai's question, the disciple who walked to the pond was shocked. He had decided to confess everything, but he did not expect that his master had already known his true identity. Lu Bai said, "I have raised you and taught you for 7 years. You can even keep a cold sword warm. I did not expect that the judicial department was born to be a block of ice." The sword garret disciple was silent for a long time before he bowed again and sincerely apologized. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect that it would end up like this." Lu Bai said expressionlessly, "If the judicial department wants to borrow the sword of the sword garret to kill someone, they should tell me in advance. Taking without asking is not borrowing, but stealing." The disciple sighed and said, "It is my duty. I do not want to do this." "I know you do not want to do this," Lu Bai repeated tiredly. The disciple slowly straightened his body and calmly looked at Lu Bai across the pond. The fact that he could withstand the fierce sword style from Lu Bai showed that his real cultivation state was much higher than usual. Of course, even if his cultivation state was several levels higher, he would still not be a match for Lu Bai. But there was no fear on his face. The sage of sword Lu Bai was the most powerful man in the world. He was feared by countless cultivators. But he was a deacon of the West Hill Divine Palace. His orders came from the Black Taoist Temple in Peach Mountain. In Lu Bai's words, he borrowed Chao Xiaoshu's sword by virtue of his authority to manage the sword garret. Then he lent it to Lu Yiqing, who was about to go to Chang'an, and said a few words to him. Taking without asking was indeed not borrowing, but stealing. But since the West Hill Divine Palace wanted to borrow the sword to kill someone, then borrowing was borrowing. Even if it was stealing in the eyes of the world, it was still borrowing. After all, Lu Bai was a visiting professor of West Hill. He had to follow Haotian's orders. What could he do to him? "Whether Prince Longqing is dead or alive, I think he is ruined." Lu Bai looked at him and said. The disciple replied respectfully, "Yes." Lu Bai said again, "I heard that Yi Hongyu was also ruined after coming back from the wilderness." The disciple said calmly, "Yes." Lu Bai laughed and said, "Will you take over the position of Grand Master after returning to Peach Mountain?" That disciple also laughed, using silence to express his acknowledgement. Lu Bai smiled even more happily and said, "Doesn't that mean you can become the great divine priest of judgment in the future?" The disciple smiled without saying a word. The smile on Lu Bai's face suddenly disappeared. He looked at the disciple and said expressionlessly, "Although it is my honor as a teacher that a disciple of the sword garret can inherit the position of great divine priest, I suddenly thought of something. If you really become the great divine priest of judgment, it will be inconvenient for me to kill you." The disciple's body stiffened as he looked at the other side of the pond. "Since you are not the great divine priest of judgment, then you have to pay a price for stealing." The disciple's expression suddenly turned cold. He wanted to say something, but he found that there was a hint of sweetness in his mouth. There was something soft and slippery between his teeth. Then he realized that it was his own tongue. Immediately after, his head was severed from his neck and fell to the ground beside the pond. It rolled around and rolled into the green pond. A moment later, a few streaks of blood appeared in the pond. The blind fish smelled the taste of its food and began to spit bubbles more cheerfully. The disciples of the sword garret, who had been silently kneeling beside the pond, came up and began to clean up the headless corpse. They noticed that the neck cavity was smooth and bloodless, and the fracture seemed to be covered by a transparent film. They could clearly see the trachea, esophagus, bones, and blood. They felt a little disgusted. To Lu Bai, killing an important figure of the judicial department of the Divine Hall was as easy as killing a mouse. His expression did not change at all. However, when his gaze landed on the letter from the academy, his brows gradually furrowed. Find Xiao Xiaoshu and send him safely back to Chang'an City. Exchange for my brother. The disciples of the sword Garrett looked at each other and left with the order. At this time, a middle-aged man walked in from outside. He looked at the floating blood bubbles in the green pond and sighed softly. He walked behind Lu Bai and asked respectfully, "Senior brother, has the problem been solved?" Lu Bai said, "If killing could solve the problem, then the world would be much better in my eyes." The middle-aged man said bitterly, "I heard that the great divine priest of judgment valued him very much. This time, he really wanted him to go back to Peach Mountain to take over Yi Hongyu's position. Senior brother, you could have cut off one of his hands. Why did you have to kill him?" After a moment of silence, Lu Bai said, "Bring me a pen and paper." Sunlight poured down from the entrance of the cave on the peak and condensed into a beam that shrouded the green pond, the hut and the person beside the pond. Lu Bai sat beside the pond under the sunlight and thought for a long time. Then he picked up the pen and paper beside him and slowly and casually scribbled on the yellowish paper. He was not writing, he was drawing. The soft ink pen walked on the paper that could not be spread flat. The lines were twisted and knotted and trembled from time to time. A few simple strokes formed a hollow long and narrow object with difficulty, but it could not be seen what it was. The format was very clumsy, and it looked like the work of a naughty child. However, such a clumsy and simple painting seemed to exhaust Lu Bai's energy. Under the reflection of the water, his cheeks looked a little pale and haggard. The middle-aged man glanced at the painting and his body suddenly stiffened. "Can you tell what I drew?" Lu Bai asked. After a moment of silence, the middle-aged man said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Senior brother, you drew a sword." Lu Bai said with satisfaction, "You can tell that it is a sword. Junior brother, it seems that your state has improved." The middle-aged man forcibly suppressed his shock and asked, "Senior brother, who are you going to give this sword to?" Lu Bai said calmly, "To West Hill, to Yi Hongyu." The middle-aged man could no longer control his emotions. He knelt behind Lu Bai and said in a trembling voice, "Senior brother, why did you do this? Why did you send it to the Tao attic?" Lu Bai looked at the paper in his hand and said, "Because after the divine priest of light died in Chang, and only this woman in the whole Peach Mountain still made me admire her. But the sword Garrett and the judicial department have broken up." The middle-aged man said anxiously in a trembling voice, "If Yi Hongyu really understood your sword style, won't she become a great enemy of the sword Garrett in the future?" Lu Bai said, "Even without my sword, the Tao addict can still cross the threshold again. I just hope that she can do it faster." He raised his head and looked at the sunlight falling on the peak. He said expressionlessly, "The old judge lent a sword to I Ching, so I will lend a sword to Yi Hongyu." The purpose of lending a sword was to kill. In a remote stone house in the Peach Mountain of West Hill. "Priest, I am just a messenger. Please don't take it to heart." Chen Bachi looked at Yi Hongyu in front of him. His eyes flickered on the loose green Taoist robe on her, and then fell on her beautiful and charming face again. He used to be the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. Although he was forced by Ning Ke to accept the punishment of the Black Ink Garden disciples when they encountered the horse gang, he was beaten with thorns and stripped of all his duties. But he still had the strength of the upper see-through state, so he still had a high status in the judicial department. In the past, his direct superior was Prince Longqing, but the person he truly feared was Yi Hongyu in front of him. Even if Yi Hongyu was in such dire straits now, he still felt a little difficult to breathe in front of her. He naturally used the old title and spoke very carefully. But after all, things were changing. Everyone in the Divine Hall knew that the great Divine Priest of Judgment had suspended Yi Hongyu from her duties as the priest and asked her to meditate and reflect. Perhaps because of the influence of this matter, Chun Bachi's eyes became more presumptuous than before. While Yi Hongyu was calmly looking out of the house, his eyes moved back and forth on her beautiful cheeks and body. The reason why Yi Hongyu, Mo Shanshan and Lu Qinjiao were called the three addicts of the world was not only because of their high cultivation states, but also because they were all very beautiful. Yi Hongyu had always been very beautiful. Her figure had always been very good and very attractive. Now, her delicate and alluring body was shrouded in a wide green Taoist robe. However, Chunbachi had seen too many images of her wearing a red short skirt. At this moment the wide green Taoist robe seemed to have disappeared, revealing a pair of straight, tight and smooth thighs. The young girl was still beautiful and attractive, and because of her current gloomy situation, her timidity made her beauty more real, making some people have the courage to possess this beauty. Chunbachi's eyes were a little obscene, but he did not dare to do so in his heart, because he did not have the courage. It had nothing to do with the majestic memories of the Tao addict in his heart, but related to what he was going to say today. Lord Luokadi is the commander of the Divine Guards and the trusted aide of the Hierarch Lord. You should be very clear about his cultivation state, priest. If he is willing to participate in the fight for the Divine Priest of Judgment, the chances of winning are very high. Seeing Yi Hongyu turn around, Chunbachi respectfully bowed and said, "If priest thinks this is feasible, the commander will personally come to express his affection and determination to you." He also said that as long as you agree, he will immediately go to the Hierarch Lord to propose marriage. Yi Hongyu looked at the seemingly respectful old subordinate in front of her and was silent for a long time. Then she calmly said, "Give me some time to think about it." Chunbachi said repeatedly, "Of course, of course." Yi Hongyu slowly closed the door of the stone house, and then sat back on the stone bed shrouded in darkness. For a Haotian Taoism woman who had almost nothing left but her face and body, a dignified commander of the Divine Guards coming to propose marriage was not only of course, but also a surprise. Her expression was still calm, but her body under the loose green Taoist robe could not help but tremble. The stone bed made a squeaking sound, as if it would collapse at any time. The more I write about Yi Hongyu, the more I like her. I have decided not to let her fall in love, marry, and be alone for the rest of her life. Is this the so-called possessiveness? See you all tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 412. In the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine in the wilderness, Lotus not only polluted her flesh and blood, but also her state of mind. Her originally clear Taoist heart was covered with dust because of something in the past. Moreover, because her knowing destiny state was not stable, there was no possibility for her to recover after she forcefully lowered her state. If she was an ordinary cultivator, she would have given up in despair when encountering such a setback. But she was not an ordinary cultivator. She was a Tao addict who was obsessed with Taoism. She was very clear that all setbacks were tests from Haotian. As long as her Taoist heart was strong enough, she could turn all of these into the most beautiful scenery on the long road of cultivation. In the wilderness, she had seen the stone array tactics set by the Divine Priest of Light 1,000 years ago. She had seen Mr. Ku's Howran sword that split the heaven and earth. These scenery were silently waiting for her to admire and absorb. But other people in the West Hill Divine Palace did not know. The great Divine Priest of Judgment did not know. Luokadi, the commander of the Divine Guards who wanted to force her to marry, did not know. The result of not knowing was that the West Hill Divine Palace not only treated her with indifference, mockery, contempt and humiliation, but also deprived her of the time she needed the most. Yi Hongyu needed time. Time to see through the scenery and see through the paper covering her eyes, so she could calmly ignore those complicated gazes and those harsh words. She could appear timid and even humble. She could kneel in front of the Divine Priest and respectfully act as if she was a hopeless waste. However, the situation she was facing now had suddenly become difficult. Although the commander of the Divine Guards, Luokadi, was a rare master in the divine hall and the most trusted subordinate of the hierarch. Yi Hongyu would never consider marrying him. Not because of his age, not because of his appearance, not even because she had no feelings for him. Because for the sake of cultivation, she could not have any feelings. But because he wanted her to marry him. He wanted her to marry him, not he begged her to marry him, not he asked her to marry him. This was a humiliation she could not accept. Yi Hongyu silently sat on the stone bed, her hands clutching the green Taoist robe so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Do I really have to go back to the temple? Chun Pippi, you damn fatty, you bitch, you idiot. I only scared you when you were young. Why did you run away? Why don't you go back to the temple now? If you don't go back, my brother won't forgive me. How can I go back? Perhaps it was because she thought of Chun Pippi, the hateful guy, or because of her brother. Yi Hongyu could no longer control her emotions. She lowered her head silently, and her eyes were full of grievance, sadness, and timidity. At this time, she was no longer the Tao addict or a loser. She was just a very ordinary girl. When an ordinary girl was forced to marry, she would naturally get angry easily. Hence, Yi Hongyu became very angry at this moment. She looked coldly at the closed door of the stone house and thought that she should kill Chunbachi, Luokadi, and everyone who dared to look at her like that. However, the anger in her eyes gradually turned into frustration and self-mockery because she had no more time. She could not return to the temple. It seemed that she could only angrily and helplessly sit by the stone bed. At this moment, someone arrived outside the stone house. Sir, there's a letter for you. The person outside the stone house did not call her a priest. He did not deliberately show respect, but such a simple sentence showed enough respect. This was the respect that only she could feel. Yi Hongyu raised her eyebrows slightly, and her expression changed slightly. In the divine hall, she had not been so respected for a long time. The door of the stone house opened. She recognized that the person was a very ordinary deacon of the judicial department. The deacon respectfully handed over a letter with both hands. Then, without saying anything, he turned and left the stone house. The door of the stone house closed again, and darkness reappeared. Yi Hongyu walked back to the stone bed and sat down. She quietly looked at the letter in her hand and did not speak for a long time. The envelope was made of ordinary craft paper. There was nothing special about it, and there was no writing on the cover. She used to be the Grand Master of the Judicial Department. Although she did not manage the specific affairs of the department, she still had a pair of eyes that could see through all the details in the world and find clues from them. The seemingly ordinary craft paper was the most common craft in the paper workshop in Danzhou. Then this letter came from the South Jin Kingdom. Yi Hongyu was sure that she did not know anyone in the South Jin Kingdom, so she did not know who the writer was. She opened the envelope, took out the letter inside, and slowly unfolded it. The letter was made of yellowish papyrus. There was a pattern drawn on the papyrus. The person who drew the picture was obviously not good at painting. The lines were crooked and trembling. It was extremely ugly and clumsy. It was impossible to understand what he drew. Yi Hongyu looked at the long and narrow hollow pattern on the yellowish paper. Her fingers, which were holding the two corners of the paper, trembled slightly. She did not speak for a long time. She understood what was drawn on the paper. It was a sword. The sword of the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. The kingdom of Yu was south of the South Jin Kingdom and east of the Great River. It faced the relatively quiet South Sea, so the fishing port was much more prosperous and lively than the one in the kingdom of Song. A young man in a cotton shirt walked out of a fishing boat. He stretched towards the sun and then squinted his eyes, signaling his subordinates to complete the following task. This young man's appearance was exceptionally handsome. The severe scar on his cheek didn't make his face appear sinister. Instead, it made him look more composed. He squinted at the red rising sun and felt the wet sea breeze on his cheek. Suddenly, He felt an unprecedented satisfaction. He said in a low voice, "It doesn't seem bad to live like this for the rest of my life." The young man's subordinates were arguing fiercely with the fish and salt merchant. But these things seemed to have nothing to do with him. He just looked at the sun in silence. The people in the fishing port only knew that this young man was a big merchant from the north. He was in the salted fish business. No one knew what kind of dazzling life this young man had before he started selling salted fish, and what kind of reputation he had in the world. The young man used to be a prince of the Yen kingdom. He was the most famous young powerhouse in the West Hill Divine Palace. He was a brilliant and beautiful man who had planted several peach blossoms on the threshold of the Knowing Destiny state. But now, he was a merchant selling fish. Even though he had been shot in the chest by Ning Ke and his cultivation state was destroyed, even though he had abandoned himself to fight for food with the beggars in the Broken Temple, he was still Prince Long Qing. Without cultivation state, he still had his fists. Even if his fists could not resist the wind and rain of the world, he still had his wisdom. Most importantly, since he was not dead, he wanted to live a better life. In half a month, he unified the beggar gang inside and outside the capital of the Yen Kingdom and became the gang leader. Then, he took a part of the gang's wealth and some loyal subordinates to the Song Kingdom. He opened a wine shop and defeated all his peers on the street in a short time. Then, he sold those wine shops, tea-houses, and restaurants to an official of the Song Kingdom at half price. With 1,000 taels of silver, he started a peddling business. He bought salted fish from the Yu Kingdom and sold them to the South Jin Kingdom or the Yen Kingdom. The business was good. Sometimes Long Qing could not help but sigh. It seemed that he could do everything well. In such a short time, he had become a big merchant. What was there to be dissatisfied with? However, looking at the salted fish in the bamboo basket, he could not help but think, even if he became the richest merchant in the world, what was the difference between him and the salted fish in the basket? I am in an extremely bad state today. I have a problem with my emotions. This is the only chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 413. It was common to feel emotional about the sea, but it was rare to feel emotional about salted fish. However, when he thought about what had happened to him in the past year, even though he was facing a basket of salted fish, Long Qing could not help but sigh. However, he was very clearly aware that any emotions like sighing and sighing with emotion were too unnecessary to him right now. Moreover, it would cause his mind that had just calmed down with great difficulty to once again feel the pain and despair that was difficult to restrain. So, he silently prepared to leave the fishing port. Suddenly, he stopped in his track. His exquisite leather shoes pressed against the wet and slippery ground as he slowly turned his body around. He saw a boat rising and falling in the waves in the distance, which was full of morning light. Long Qing's eyes were still much sharper than ordinary people's, and he saw a Taoist in indigo standing on the boat. The Taoist in indigo on the boat looked ordinary and there was nothing special about him, but he couldn't move his eyes away because his body became extremely stiff because of the shock. Fishermen and coolies carried heavy catches on their backs and walked through the slippery deck. On the shore, merchants were smoking cigarettes and shouting arrogantly. Seabirds were flying back and forth between the surface of the sea and the ship's mast. The fishing port of Yu country was busy and noisy as usual. It seemed that no one had seen that small boat. Long Qing silently looked at the boat and the Taoist on the boat from a distance of hundreds of feet. His eyes were uneasy with the ups and downs of the waves in the distance. He was not a cultivator now, but he still had his insight. It was clear that the Taoist in indigo must be a cultivator, and he couldn't see through him at all. Even he, who was once powerful, couldn't see through him. The Taoist in indigo on the boat in the distance stood at the bow of the boat with his hands behind his back. He slightly raised his head to look at the rising sun in the east, and his whole body seemed to melt in the reddish morning light. Looking at the back of the Taoist in indigo, Long Qing suddenly had an impulse to run away. At this moment, a calm but oppressive voice sounded in his mind. Is there really such a thing as satisfaction in the world? The Taoist in indigo on the distant sea did not turn around, so he couldn't see whether he spoke or not. But Long Qing knew that the voice in his mind was the Taoist's question. Hearing this question, his handsome eyebrows slightly frowned, and he seemed to be in pain. He lowered his head to look at a struggling shrimp in the mucus at his feet and murmured, "What can I do if I can't be satisfied?" Then, he raised his head and looked at the Taoist in indigo on the boat in the distance. With some resentment and frustration, he said, "The light has abandoned itself, and the darkness disdains to kill itself. What right do a good-for-nothing like me have to complain? What kind of life can I hope for?" The Taoist's voice sounded again in Long Qing's mind from thousands of feet away. "You have experienced so many things in the past year, but you still don't understand the real relationship between light and darkness. You've experienced so many things in the past year. Don't tell me you still don't understand the true relationship between light and darkness?" Long Qing thought of the dream when he was climbing the mountain in the academy. It was a dream that made him extremely painful, proud, glorious, and ultimately frustrated. Thinking of the boundless golden light in the dream, he suddenly understood something. His body suddenly became cold and began to tremble uneasily under the late spring sun. "But that is not my original belief." He stared at the Taoist in indigo on the boat in the distance. His trembling voice was like the wind on the mast. It came out from his lips and teeth stiffly and coldly, with endless despair. The Taoist in indigo did not turn around. He still looked at the red morning sun with his hands behind his back. "Can belief satisfy you?" Long Qing replied, "It used to be." The Taoist in indigo was silent. Long Qing lowered his head and looked at the struggling shrimp at his feet. He asked painfully, "Is this really okay?" The Taoist in indigo said, "Yes." Long Qing asked with some confusion, "Is it worth it?" The Taoist in indigo said, "It depends on whether you are satisfied or not. If you are satisfied with the present, it is not worth it. If you are not satisfied, it is worth it. I have always thought that there is no real satisfaction in the world, so I think it is worth it no matter when." In the end, it came back to the original problem of satisfaction. Long Qing forcibly suppressed his confusion, shock, and helplessness. He frowned and thought hard. In a long silence, he recalled the past and guessed his future life. Was he really satisfied? In capital Cheng, he led the beggars to fight for food and territory. He stole money by kidnapping and cheating. Finally, he earned a sum of money and went to the kingdom of Song to open a shop and sell salted fish to earn money. Just like that, he lived a peaceful and happy life and became an ordinary successful businessman. He married a beautiful and gentle wife, had 2 concubines, and had many children. Many years later, when he was old and made sure that no one in Yen Kingdom was after him, he secretly took his family back to capital Cheng. He knelt on the royal road outside the palace and pointed at the equally old emperor. He trembled and told his grandson that Grandpa had a good relationship with the emperor, but he should have been sitting there. Then, he was about to die. He asked his family to carry him to the West Hill Divine Kingdom. He came to the foot of the holy mountain full of peach blossoms and squeezed into the crowd of sick women who came to pray to heaven for medical help. Then, he weakly lay on the stretcher and watched the indifferent and proud cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the black-robed deacons pass by. He looked at the majestic Taoist temples on the high ground. 2 lines of tears flowed down his wrinkled cheeks and he cried weakly, "I should have been sitting there." That kind of life was right. For that kind of life, it was worth doing anything, even if he had to betray his original belief and accept the most painful spiritual baptism. Long Qing stood in the morning light by the sea and stood in the smell of salted fish and sea breeze. He was unconscious and didn't smell the stench. He was like a soulless body. Suddenly, he knelt down. With a crisp sound, his knees crushed the struggling shrimp in the mucus in front of him. He looked at the boat hundreds of feet away and the body of the Taoist in indigo. He put his hands on the ground and knelt down. Tears flowed down his face silently. He trembled and said, "Please guide my way." The voice of the Taoist in indigo sounded in his mind again, "Follow me." Long Qing, who was kneeling on the ground, was a little confused. He didn't know how to approach the boat, nor how to follow the back of the Taoist in indigo on the boat. When he raised his head, he found that he was no longer in front of the fishing port, but a vast blue sea. Seabirds fell into the sea from time to time, disturbing the morning light and the color of the sea. The back of the Taoist in indigo was only 2 steps away from him. He didn't know when he had come to the boat. Long Qing looked at the Taoist in indigo standing at the bow of the boat and was shocked speechless. When he saw the picture on the side of the boat, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. The South Sea was much calmer than the East Sea, but the wind and waves were still very strong. Ships that could sail in the South Sea, no matter their size, were very particular. Before the construction of the ship, the wood used for the ship had to be piled up in the shipyard for a long time, exposed to the wind, rain, and sun. Only after the stress was relieved could it be used. In other words, any ship wood was dead wood. However, at this time, a peach blossom grew on the side of the boat. A new peach blossom grew from the dead wood. It was a black peach blossom, slightly trembling in the sea breeze and threatening in the morning light. "I have something to report to you. In the past 2 days, I really have emotional problems and I really can't write. That's all I have to take responsibility for. I will change it as soon as possible and will never miserably step into the same mistakes as last month. Fortunately, I can have a day off tomorrow. I will deal with the details and emotions, and then I must put pressure on myself. I will have 3 chapters on Sunday and 3 chapters on Monday. If I feel right, then I hope that the 3 chapters can last for 2 more days. I bow to you." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 4:14. Looking at the clansman's formation, the woman knew that what she was most afraid of had finally happened. Looking at the mud on her body and smelling the stench, she thought about what might happen. Fear and grievance intertwined in her heart, and tears flowed down uncontrollably. She looked at the chief and asked in a trembling voice, "What happened?" The strong man looked at her angrily and growled, "You put a man from another place in the house, and you dare to ask us what happened? You unfaithful *tsh, you're a disgrace to the whole clan." The woman lowered her head in silence, panicked and didn't know what to say. Although she wanted to explain that nothing had happened between her and the man from another place, she knew that the clansman wouldn't believe her. More importantly, she knew very well that she was indeed unfaithful and wanted something to happen between her and the man from another place. The chief coughed lightly and stopped the villagers from smashing the house. He walked to the woman, looked at her slightly lowered head, and glanced at her plump breasts. He sighed and said, "Lindsay, although you are from Ueluen, can we not treat you well after you married into our village?" The woman lowered her head and begged with a trembling voice, "Thank you for taking care of me all these years, 4th elder master and the clansman." The chief's face suddenly turned cold. He said, "After Brother Qing died, I made the decision to let you remarry. You refused and said that you wanted to keep your chastity for Brother Qing. So we did as you said. But what are you doing now?" Hearing this, the woman raised her head and looked at the strong man. She thought sadly, "Chief, you want me to remarry your son. How can this be?" When Brother Qing fell off the cliff and died while picking herbs, he was by his side. Who knew what had happened at that time? At this moment, Chao Xiaoshu walked out of the house. The villagers saw that the man from another place didn't run away and even dared to appear in front of them. They became even angrier and brandished their hoes, ready to beat him to death. However, the clan elder strangely stopped the crowd. Chao Xiaoshu had been listening for a while in the house. Looking at the situation, he knew what had happened. When he was in Chang'an, he knew that the people of the Great River Nation were conservative and traditional, especially women in rural villages and towns, had an extremely low status. However, he didn't expect that such a storm would arise. He walked in front of the clan leader and gave a few sincere words of explanation. The clan leader expressionlessly shook his head and said, "This matter concerns the reputation of our clan. How can we let such a shameless woman go so easily?" Chao Xiaoshu said calmly, "If I really had an affair with her, would the clan leader punish me?" The chief looked at him and said after a moment of silence, "I know you are a Tang, so as long as you apologize and leave a sum of money as compensation, you can leave." Chao Xiaoshu glanced at the trembling woman and asked, "What are you going to do with her?" Before the chief could say anything, the strong man fiercely said, "Drown him in the pig cage." The words pig cage seemed to have a strange allure to these villagers. Immediately, shouts rang out in the small courtyard. They all shouted that they wanted to drown the woman in the pig cage, and then strip her naked and beat her with a paddle. Chao Xiaoshu looked around and saw the greedy and obscene looks in the men's eyes. He looked at their twisted faces because of excitement and said softly, "It seems that we can kill these people." The small courtyard under the big banyan tree suddenly became quiet. The clansmen seemed to think that they had heard something, but they could not believe what they had heard. The chief's face suddenly became gloomy. He looked at Chao Xiaoshu and was about to say something. However, before he could speak, Chao Xiaoshu turned to look at the woman and asked gently, "Do you think we should kill these people?" The woman's body was slightly stiff, and she came to her senses after a moment. She had been desperate, but now, looking at Chao Xiaoshu's gentle expression, she felt that hope was returning to her body. She looked at the hateful clansman, and her body suddenly trembled violently. She cried and said, "I am not from this village. I am from the forest of Yueluan Kingdom. I was sold here by human traffickers. My husband is dead. They want me to marry the chief's son. I don't want to marry, I don't want to marry." She had never said these words to outsiders because there were no outsiders in this remote village. No one believed her words, and even if they did, no one dared to sympathize with her. So she wanted to know the story of the outside world, and wanted to have a story with the outside world. At this moment, she finally shouted these words because she wanted to live. "It's good that you killed them." Chao Xiaoshu looked at the people in the yard and asked, "Who did you kill?" The woman pointed at the white-haired chief and the strong man, and said in a trembling voice, "This father and son deserve to die the most." Chao Xiaoshu took 2 steps forward. The clansmen in the yard raised the hoes and iron forks in their hands, wanting to hit him. The fence was trampled by these people. Chao Xiaoshu picked up a piece of bamboo. Then he waved it twice. The heads of the chief and the strong man flew up. The clansmen looked at this scene in a daze, and their faces suddenly turned pale. Someone shouted, and everyone fled in all directions. No one cared about the 2 bodies on the fence. "Murder! Go and report it to the government." Frightened and desperate cries rang out in the village, startling the fish in the pond and disturbing the birds in the banyan tree. It tore apart the peace and rules that had lasted for thousands of years. The headless bodies of the chief and his son were still lying in the simple and crude yard. The woman's face was pale, and her body was trembling slightly. But the luster in her eyes was brighter than it had been in the past 10 years. Chao Xiaoshu looked at her and asked, "Do you still miss this village and this yard?" The woman shook her head and murmured, "How could I?" Chao Xiaoshu said, "Then come with me." The woman looked at his eyes in surprise, and her eyes were full of surprise. She said nervously, "Okay." She was very nervous, so she didn't ask where he was going. She wanted to go with him. As long as she could leave this village, she was willing to go wherever he went. However, at this moment, Chao Xiaoshu suddenly became silent. He frowned slightly, as if he was hesitating. Some words should not be said at this time. The woman's body was slightly stiff. After a moment of silence, she said bitterly, "Yes, I am a shameless and dissolute woman. How can you bring me home? You'd better give me some money, and I will live on my own. In the end, I will still ask you for money, but I don't care if you laugh at me." Chao Xiaoshu looked at her and said, "I will only give money to one kind of woman." The woman's face was pale, and she said miserably, "I see. Unfortunately, although I am a dissolute widow, and I want to give my body to you, I am not willing to earn money from you with my body." Chao Xiaoshu looked at her eyes quietly and said gently, "You misunderstood me. I mean, I will only give money to my wife, but I don't know if you are willing to give it to me." The woman was stunned for a long time before she came to her senses. She rubbed her eyes, wanting to cry, but also feeling a little embarrassed. Chao Xiaoshu looked at her and smiled. He went into the house, packed his luggage, and then walked into the yard. Looking at the woman who was still in a daze, he said, "Let's go." The woman took the luggage from his hand. The two then left. Ning Ke had been thinking about three things. The first thing he wanted to know was why the Sadhu Daosher was able to find him in Chang'an with such accuracy. Was there someone behind the scenes who was behind this? Second, if the judicial department of the Divine Hall was involved in the sword Garrett's provocation of the Academy and the theft of Chao Xiaoshu's sword, then where would the sword Garrett be if not Chao Xiaoshu? Third, how to reply to the West Hill Divine Palace's request to take Sang Sang away. The last two things were related to the West Hill Divine Palace. Thinking of Qing Lishue's attitude towards the judicial department, he felt that he should go to the Southern Gate Temple, at least to inquire about some things. The great divine priest of Revelation was now in the Southern Gate Temple. To negotiate with such a bigwig, he must first of all, of course, unify the opinions of his side, so that they could work together. Girls must have some dreams in life. Look at the Tao addict, her dream is very simple. She wants to walk to the end of the long road of cultivation. Look at Situilan, she wants to be the greatest female general in the history of the Tang Empire. Even Tang Xiaotang wants to be the most powerful woman in the world. Ning Ke stood behind Sang Sang and muttered. Sang Sang squatted by the well, concentrating on pickling the small yellow croaker. She did not want to talk to him, nor did she want to discuss this matter with him. Only with dreams can there be pursuits. Only with pursuits can life be fulfilling. A woman without dreams will eventually become a lifeless fish eyeball, a salted fish that cannot turn over a new leaf. Looking at her thin back, Ning Ke sighed and said, "Of course I don't want you to leave. But since you have the ability, it would be a pity to waste your time on daily necessities. I'm afraid that when you grow old, you will be afraid of your current choice." Sang Sang placed the salted fish in the bamboo basket and washed her hands in the cool well water. She turned to look at him and said, "I've thought about it carefully. I still don't want to go to the West Hill." Ning Ke asked, "Why?" Sang Sang said seriously, "It's the same old problem. Who will cook for you after I leave?" Ning Ke said, "This is indeed a troublesome problem. It's easy to find a few more maids. The problem is that I can't sleep well without you." After a while, he shook his head and said with emotion, "But I can't let the West Hill Divine Palace lose the great Divine Priest of Light just because there is no one to cook for me and I can't sleep well. This matter will be recorded in the history book. My body will definitely be dug up by the future generations." That night, the master and the servant had a very deep conversation about this matter. They talked until late at night before reaching a preliminary conclusion and falling asleep wearily. The next morning, Ning Ke and Sang Sang washed up and had breakfast. When they were about to go to the Southern Gate Temple to visit the great divine priest of Revelation, they suddenly heard the ritual music coming from the distance. The neutral and peaceful ritual music gradually approached Lin 47th Street from afar. Wherever the music reached, there was first a noisy discussion and then absolute silence. Ning Ke was a little surprised. He pushed open the door of the old brush pen shop and looked at the entrance of the alley. He saw fresh flower petals flying all over the sky, and the music was gentle. A divine sedan was slowly coming under the solemn guard of honor. The great divine priest of revelation had arrived. Damn it, it only took me an hour to finish this chapter. I still like to write this kind of rural literature. Does it start from Ingxio? I'll try to finish the 3rd chapter before midnight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 4:15. Hundreds of Yulin royal guards and divine hall guards of Tang guarded around the sacred chariot. They looked solemn and looked around vigilantly among the petals. There were no remnants of the devil's doctrine in Chang'an, nor were there any fanatics. Wherever the great divine priest of revelation went, it attracted countless people to watch. There were pious women and elders kneeling by the road, and the people standing also bowed respectfully, not daring to look at the old man behind the veil on the sacred sedan. The sacred chariot entered the Lin 47th Street and stopped in front of the old brush pen shop. People in the crowded street were talking about it and envied the owner of the shop. They sighed with emotion about the arrival of the great divine priest of revelation, but they did not know that another great divine priest of West Hill had worked in the shop for a long time last year. The Yulin royal guards set up a cordon at the entrance of the alley and invited the crowd outside. The divine hall guards occupied several key places at the entrance of the old brush pen shop. The veil was lifted and the great divine priest of revelation slowly walked down from the sacred chariot. Ning Ke and Sang Sang stood at the entrance of the old brush pen shop to welcome him respectfully. Only the great divine priest of revelation and Cheng Lixue walked into the old brush pen shop. Ning Ke respectfully invited the great divine priest to sit down and wanted to ask Sang Sang to make tea. But he suddenly remembered that Cheng Lixue had said it was disrespectful to West Hill and Taoism, so he did it himself. 4 cups of tea were quietly placed on the table. The steam slowly dispersed. The great divine priest of revelation looked like a very ordinary old man. The deep wrinkles on his face were like mountains and rivers. Only the gorgeous divine robe he wore showed his noble identity. Ning Ke had met many bigwigs, but it was the first time for him to negotiate with such a noble bigwig like the great divine priest of revelation. He was a little nervous and did not know what to say. Sang Sang was also a little nervous. Although Ning Ke had explained the inheritance rules of the great divine priest of light last night, she still could not understand why the divine hall still wanted to take her back since her teacher had betrayed the West Hill divine palace. The great divine priest of revelation looked at them calmly and suddenly smiled. As his smile bloomed, the mountain-like wrinkles at the corners of his eyes deepened. His slightly sunken eyes suddenly calmed down. They were so quiet that no one knew how deep they were. They were like an old well in a dry mountain made of stones. Facing the gaze of the great divine priest of revelation, Ning Ke suddenly felt that his clothes had disappeared. He felt naked and instinctively felt that he had been seen through. It wasn't his body that had been seen through, but the concealment he had deliberately placed on his soul had been seen through. Even the direction of his fate had been seen through, leaving him with nowhere to hide. Ning Ke suddenly became alert and said, "Ning Ke of the Academy greets the great divine priest." The great divine priest of revelation said, "Forget it." Ning Ke sat down on the chair opposite the great divine priest. It was quiet in the old brush pen shop. Ning Ke understood that he was the owner and should speak first. However, he did not know how to do it. The steam from the teacup gradually dissipated, and a green tea leaf floated up from the bottom of the teacup. Ning Ke's throat was a little dry. He said in a slightly tight voice, "Can we think about it again?" Qing Lixue, who was standing behind the great divine priest of revelation, frowned and said unhappily, "Think about it again? Mr. 13, can you stop procrastinating?" The great divine priest of revelation raised his right hand and stopped Qing Lixue from continuing. He said, "I have something to do in West Hill, so I have to go back. Before I go back, there must be a result." Ning Ke did not pay attention to the great divine priest's words at all. He was thinking about something else. He laughed dryly and said, "The great divine priest of revelation is leaving? Did you buy any local specialties?" Qing Lixue's expression was very ugly. The great divine priest of revelation laughed and shook his head. The smile on his old face gradually faded, and the deep wrinkles gradually smoothed out. The great divine priest of revelation looked at Ning Ke's eyes quietly and said, "You know how important she is to the divine hall." Sang Sang looked down at the tip of her shoes outside her skirt and quietly moved 2 steps behind Ning Ke, as if hoping that he could cover himself. However, he could not. The great divine priest of revelation looked at Sang Sang lovingly and said, "Because she is the successor of light." Ning Ke hesitated and said, "Sang Sang is still very young. It doesn't sound right for her to be the great divine priest of West Hill and be on an equal footing with you." Qing Lixue glanced at the great divine priest of revelation and explained softly, "The succession of the great divine priest is a long process. After returning to West Hill, younger sister Sang Sang must first study the scriptures and then go to the secular world to cultivate in seclusion. She must experience the joys and sorrows of the human world before she can inherit the great divine priest's position. The preparatory work before this is called political training." Then he continued to explain, "It will take a long time for younger sister Sang Sang to ascend to the great divine priest of light, so the divine hall is anxious. It is best to enter the political training period as soon as possible." Ning Ke suddenly asked, "Is there a holiday?" Qing Lixue was slightly startled. He thought that the divine hall was not an ordinary school. How could there be such an arrangement? However, before he could speak, the great divine priest of revelation smiled and said, "Yes." Ning Ke looked at the great divine priest of revelation and continued to ask, "How long?" The great divine priest of revelation said, "As long as she can spend more than half of her time in the Peach Mountain of West Hill." Ning Ke asked again, "Can she go out of West Hill during the holiday?" "Yes." "Can I go to West Hill to see her?" "Yes." "If she becomes the great divine priest of light, can she really get married?" The great divine priest of revelation looked at him with a faint smile and said, "Yes." Qing Lixue looked at the great divine priest in surprise. The question and answer between Ning Ke and the great divine priest of revelation came to an abrupt end. He said, "Then I have no questions." The atmosphere in the old brush pen shop had just relaxed a little when Ning Ke unexpectedly added, "But it doesn't mean that she has no questions. Next, you need to convince her." Qing Lixue was furious and scolded in a low voice, "How dare you be so rude to the great divine priest?" Ning Ke said, "I am not flirting with the divine hall. If the great divine priest said no to any of the conditions, then I would not allow Sang Sang to go to West Hill. Now I allow her to go to West Hill, but it doesn't mean that I support her going there. It only means that I support any decision she makes." The great divine priest of revelation did not pay attention to the conversation between Ning Ke and Qing Lixue at all. He just looked at Sang Sang quietly. Sang Sang lowered her head and said softly, "I don't want to go now." The great divine priest of revelation looked at Ning Ke quietly. Ning Ke said, "Last night I discussed with her for a long time. After all, she is only 15 years old and still a child. I really don't feel comfortable letting her leave me. How about going when she is an adult?" The great divine priest of revelation smiled and said, "Next year?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, 3 years later." The great divine priest of revelation said, "According to the law of the Tang Empire, a girl can become an adult at 16. The law of the Tang Empire says that a girl can get married at 16, but it doesn't mean she is an adult. Ning Ke said, in my opinion, only when she is 18 will she have enough life experience and wisdom to arrange her life. So I insist on going to West Hill after 3 years. 3 years. The great divine priest of revelation sighed softly and looked at Sang Sang behind Ning Quebec. With this glance, the wrinkles on his face deepened, as if a storm had fallen from the sky, washing the dry yellow mountains and rivers even more precipitous. His eyes also became deeper and calmer, and the old well hidden in the depths of the stone mountain became several feet deeper. Sang Sang nervously waited for the answer. Ning Ke was even more nervous than her. The great divine priest of revelation looked at Sang Sang with a smile and said, 3 years later, see you in West Hill. After saying this very suddenly, the great divine priest of revelation stood up and walked out of the old brush pen shop. The great divine priest boarded the divine chariot and left under the lingering ritual music. The master and the servant in the old brush pen shop were left looking at each other. So simple? Ning Ke did not understand why the great divine priest of revelation said the last sentence with such certainty. 3 years later, see you in West Hill. Was the great divine priest sure that Sang Sang would go to West Hill in 3 years? Cheng Lishua followed the great divine priest and left the old brush pen shop. He boarded the divine chariot and lifted the veil. He walked to the back of the great divine priest and knelt down. He whispered, I don't understand. Do I really go back to West Hill like this? Junior sister Sang Sang didn't even make a promise. Verbal promises never have any power. The great divine priest of revelation took out a white silk handkerchief from his sleeve and gently wiped the corners of his eyes. As the snow-like handkerchief fell, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes bloomed like flowers. Cheng Lishu lowered his head and said confusedly, but since we are here, why do we have to leave in such a hurry? The great divine priest of revelation looked at the snow-white silk handkerchief in his hand and said after a moment of silence, because the thing that is about to happen in the judicial department is more serious than I thought. Cheng Lishua raised his head and said confusedly, but you said a few days ago that the event in the judicial department is not necessarily a bad thing for the divine hall. The revelation God is just following the order of heaven. Stopping it in advance is equivalent to going against heaven. The great divine priest of revelation said, returning to West Hill is not to stop it, but to ensure that after it happens, it can develop according to the existing track. Cheng Lishua's eyes fell on the silk handkerchief in the great divine priest's hand. His body suddenly stiffened because he saw a few bloodstains on the snow-white silk handkerchief. Only then did he realize that the corner of the great divine priest's eyes were bleeding. I saw the light on the Peach Mountain 3 years later. So 3 years later, she will return to West Hill. The great divine priest of revelation continued to wipe the blood from the corner of his eyes calmly. Cheng Lishua was a little confused and asked blankly, what else did you see? You idiot. The light is our closest companion. I only took a look at her and I almost went blind. How could I see anything else? The great divine priest of revelation said with a smile. Then he folded the white silk handkerchief in his hand and continued to wipe the blood from his eyes. The white silk handkerchief was gradually dyed red by the blood that flowed from his eyes. The deep wrinkles at the corner of his eyes were also dyed red by the blood, like a gorgeous peach blossom. It was more like a barren land soaked in blood. Before the West Hill Diplomatic Corps left Chang'an, Ning Ke went to the Southern Gate Temple and learned from Cheng Lishua that the Judicial Department was indeed behind the attack on the Sword Garret. He became more and more worried about Chao Xiaoshu's safety. When he was thinking about leaving Chang'an to look for him in the South Jin Kingdom, he suddenly received a letter from the Great River Kingdom. He had thought that it was from Shanshan, and he felt an indescribable sense of joy. Then he found that it was from Chao Xiaoshu. He was disappointed and then happy and then angry. He's alive and well. Why didn't he write a few letters in advance? I think he's really happy outside. He's so happy that he even forgot his own father. What an idiot! A middle-aged man in a bright yellow robe angrily waved his sleeves and scolded. I guess second brother Chow met a pretty widow who grinds tofu in a small mountain village. His legs turned to jelly and he couldn't bear to come back. Only an idiot would do something like that. Ning Kei looked at the letter in his hand and sarcastically said, "In the secluded hall deep in the Tang Imperial Palace, the curses of idiots could be heard from time to time." The Empress and the others looked at the angry expressions of the Emperor and Ning Kei and could not help but laugh. People really need to put pressure on themselves. Today's writing was really smooth. Tomorrow there will be 3 more chapters. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 4:16. Speaking of idiots, there were 2 people in Chang, and who liked to call others idiot. One was the Emperor of Tang, and the other was Ning Quebec. It was just that His Majesty had always scolded people as idiots regardless of the occasion and situation. Ning Kei, on the other hand, was used to calling others idiots in a mean tone when chatting with Sang Sang. He was petty from the inside out. That was why he was so excited to scold Chow Xiaoshu as an idiot with His Majesty in the Imperial Palace today. His spittle flew everywhere. The word, idiot, flew like rain in the quiet palace, causing the Empress and all the eunuchs and serving girls to be surprised and amused. They covered their mouths tightly to stop themselves from laughing. However, the scene was, after all, a bit awkward. The Empress signaled the female official beside her with her eyes and led the serving girls and eunuchs out of the palace quietly. After a long time, the Emperor and the minister in the palace finally vented their anger towards Chow Xiaoshu. They stopped panting, and the sound of the word, idiot, gradually faded away. The Emperor picked up a square handkerchief from beside the couch and wiped the sweat on his face. He looked at Ning Kei with satisfaction in his eyes. As a wise emperor, sometimes he was bound by the words, wise emperor, and could not be happy. Today he could find someone to curse with him, which made him feel very comforted and happy. What's wrong with your little handmaiden? The great divine priest of revelation didn't tell me about it before he left Chang'an. How did you discuss it? The Emperor tapped on the table and motioned for Ning Kei to drink tea. Ning Kei picked up the teacup but didn't drink it immediately. He answered, "We'll talk about it in 3 years. If Sang Sang wants to go to West Hill, she can go." The Emperor asked, "Tell me about your little handmaiden. How did she suddenly become the young lady of Xingjing's mansion? How did she suddenly become the great divine priest of light?" Ning Kei took a sip of tea to moisten his throat. He carefully told the Emperor about how he picked up Sang Sang from a pile of corpses by the roadside and what happened to her in the following years. The Emperor was silent for a while and said with emotion, "Such a strange life experience is hard to describe. The relationship between you and her is rare in the world. You should cherish it." Ning Kei nodded. The Emperor looked at him and asked, "Why didn't she follow you into the palace to see me today?" Ning Kei said, "She went to the princess's mansion to play. Her Highness has always been on good terms with her. Moreover, the little prince missed her after not seeing her for a few days." As the Emperor listened to his explanation, his brows furrowed slightly in worry. Ning Kei understood where His Majesty's worries came from. After a moment of silence, he said, "Your Majesty, although these things are the affairs of the world, they are ultimately family affairs." After a moment of silence, the Emperor asked, "What did the headmaster say?" Ning Kei shook his head. The Emperor sighed and said, "That's true. With Master's temperament, how could he care about such troublesome matters?" The hall was silent. After an unknown amount of time, the Emperor looked into Ning Kei's eyes and suddenly asked, "I want to know, what exactly is the enmity between you and General Xiahou?" Without thinking, Ning Kei shook his head and said, "There was no hatred before I went to the wilderness. In other words, it will appear after we go to the wasteland." The Emperor looked at him and said, That's why you killed a military counselor in Tuyang City. Ning Ke knew that His Majesty was referring to the death of Gu Shi. After thinking for a moment, he said, I don't know what your Majesty is referring to. Killing a military counselor without permission is a capital crime according to the law of the Tang Empire. The Emperor stroked his beard and laughed. He said mockingly, Even in front of me, you are not willing to show any evidence. You are probably the only cautious guy in the academy these years. Ning Ke replied with a bitter smile, Some things can't be answered. The Emperor said, Then give me a reason. Ning Ke said, In the wilderness, General Xiaoho's subordinates disguised as horse gang wanted to kill me, and the general himself was waiting to kill me in the north of Hulun Sea. These two things had long been known to the imperial court through two channels, the secret guards and the imperial center administration. However, the imperial court did not take any measures against Xiaoho except for a reprimand. The emperor put the silk handkerchief on the table and said, You should be very clear that Mr. First dealt with it like that. It was my idea. You should also understand what I mean. I don't have any resentment. I'm just confused as to why those bigwigs in the imperial military refused to let me go. I don't understand where the military's hostility towards me comes from. Ning Ke said, First of all, General Xiaoho wanted to kill me in the wilderness. I can understand that he was blinded by the temptation of the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane. But what about General Su Shi? As an important minister of the empire, he tried to kill my little handmaiden, and now he seems to be very dissatisfied with me. I used to be a soldier of the Tang Empire, so I don't understand why he is so vigilant against me. His words were very clear. Whether it was out of consideration for the Empress's mood, the stability of the empire, or the West Hill Divine Palaces spying on them, as long as Xiaoho was willing to retire and the Academy had agreed, the Emperor would definitely not punish General Xiaoho severely. Ning Ke expressed that he could accept this decision, but he wanted to let the Emperor know that he could not accept the pressure from the Tang Empire's military. He wanted an explanation. After a moment of silence, the Emperor said, General Su Shi has never been defeated on the battlefield, but he can never raise his head in front of youngest uncle. It's natural for him to be hostile to the Academy. As for why he is so vigilant against you, I really don't know. Maybe you should ask him himself. Ning Ke thought that even though he was now a student of the second floor of the Academy, it was still a behavior that was asking for a beating to confront the top military man of the Tang Empire. The Emperor did not let him stay in this mood for too long. He stood up from the side of the bed and raised his sword-like eyebrows. He looked at him and said in a clear voice, Have you brought that thing? Ning Ke raised his hand to touch the hard object in his arms and said, Yes. That's good. I'll take you to a place. The Emperor flicked his sleeves and walked out of the hall. It was the end of spring, the most enchanting time in Chang'an. Walking in the imperial palace, one could see blooming spring flowers everywhere, green leaves gradually flourishing, quiet lakes without ripples, and pavilions occasionally standing alone. The Emperor did not bring any attendants or bodyguards with him. He only brought Ning Ke out of the palace and walked to the depths of the imperial garden. Along the way, the eunuchs and palace maids they met all retreated to the side of the road in awe and silence. Then, they looked at the two figures that were getting further and further away with surprised and puzzled expressions on their faces. The people in the imperial palace were the smartest people. Of course, they knew that the young man in black beside the Emperor was the legendary Master Ning Quebec. But they did not understand where His Majesty was taking Ning Ke to and why he did not leave any servants with him. There was a 2-story wooden building in the depths of the imperial garden. It was painted in red and looked very exquisite, but compared to the towering palace in the distance, it still looked a little shabby. The Emperor brought Ning Ke to the small wooden building and said, This is it. Outside the small building, the green trees were dense and the wildflowers were in full bloom. It was obvious that they had not been trimmed for a long time. Ning-Ke looked at the grass growing between the stone bricks under his feet and thought that perhaps very few people would come here. Then, he raised his head and looked around. His eyes met the walls of the imperial palace and confirmed that this small wooden building was not only in the center of the imperial garden, but also in the center of the entire imperial palace. The emperor pushed open the door of the small wooden building and walked in. Ning-Ke followed him in. After entering the small wooden building, His Majesty did not go up the stairs but walked downstairs. A dark passage extended to the depths of the wooden building. Ning-Ke looked at the dark passage and could not help but raise his eyebrows. He thought that it was indeed the most important place of the Tang Empire. There was nothing new at all. There were things like luminous pearls in the hard stone walls of the passage, emitting a faint light. It did not make people feel afraid, but made people feel at ease. Ning-Ke followed His Majesty downstairs. Looking at the luminous pearls beside him, he thought that any one of them could probably buy the building of pines and cranes. Thinking of the shabby two-story wooden building above, he increasingly felt that the person who built this place was a man who was inwardly coquettish. As he was thinking about these trivial things, his pupils suddenly shrank and he looked up at the stone wall alertly. He saw several deep lines in front of several luminous pearls. Those lines contained an extremely neutral, peaceful, yet indifferent and extremely strong aura. It seemed that as long as it was emitted, it could crush everything in the passage into powder. Ning-Ke clearly sensed this aura and gasped in shock. As a talisman cultivator, of course, he could understand that these lines were all Fu characters. These Fu characters were very powerful, but they seemed to be incomplete. Now these lines on the stone wall were just fragments of the original Fu lines. He looked at the lines on the stone wall and calculated the time of their existence. He was shocked and thought silently, what state did the predecessor who carved these Fu lines 1,000 years ago reach? He could actually maintain the power of Fu for such a long time. Could a divine talisman master like his master do it? The emperor noticed his expression and looked up at the stone wall above. After a moment of silence, he sighed with emotion. When my father took me here for the first time, I was as shocked as you. I could only vaguely feel the power of these Fu characters, but I did not want to come here often. What are the conditions to activate these Fu characters? Ning-Ke was indeed the successor of Master Yen-Sei. He raised the most critical question. Even if the person who carved the Fu characters 1,000 years ago was a divine talisman master, how could the divine talisman he made still maintain its power after his death? It should be known that not every nation master of Tang was a talisman master. Today, Li Qingshan was not one. The emperor said, "There are no conditions. Anyone who enters the passage will be killed by these Fu characters." Ning-Ke asked confusedly, "Anyone?" The emperor nodded and calmly repeated, "Anyone." Ning-Ke could not help laughing and said, "Your Majesty and I are not people?" The emperor also laughed. After a moment, his smile gradually disappeared and he calmly said, "I am the Emperor of Tang. I hold the national seal and have the imperial aura. So these Fu characters can't hurt me." Ning-Ke asked, "What about me?" The emperor said, "You are now the owner of these Fu characters. Today's state is not as good as yesterday's, but I have gradually recovered. I will try to finish the second chapter before 11:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 4:17. Hearing the Emperor's words, Ning-Ke's expression became a little complicated. He subconsciously raised his hand and touched the slightly hard thing in his arms through the black academy uniform. The dark passage under the small building was not long. It didn't take long for them to reach the deepest part, which was an empty underground hall. Ning-Ke had enough mental preparation for what he would see today, but he didn't expect that there was nothing in this hall. The ground in the hall spread around until it disappeared in the darkness. It seemed to be boundless, and there was nothing but dust. There were no countless treasures, armors, magic weapons, iron men or strange beasts, or traces of tactical arrays as he had imagined. The ground was so clean and empty that it made his heart palpitate. There was no gap on the ground paved with granite, and no one knew what craftsmanship the craftsman had used to build the palace. Ning Ke looked up at the starry night pearls on the top of the hall and the man-made stone walls, recalling the wisdom and action of the predecessors of the Tang Empire. He couldn't help but feel dazzled. The emperor led Ning Ke to walk on the clean stone ground into the hall. Their footsteps occasionally brought up a few wisps of thousand-year-old dust. The emperor stopped when they came to the center of the wide stone ground. Ning Ke noticed that there was a small hole in the center of the ground. The edge of the black hole was smooth and perfectly blended with the ground, and it was only as deep as an ordinary person's palm. The emperor said, "You know what to do." Ning Ke looked at the small hole on the ground and suddenly asked, "Is this the array eye?" The emperor said, "No, the one in your arms is the array eye." Ning Ke was shocked and speechless. He had always thought that the array eye should be an eye, and the thing in his arms was only the key to open it. Now he knew that the array eye had been with him all the time, and he couldn't help feeling a little scared. After a moment of silence, he took out an object from his arms, put it at his feet, and slowly untied the cloth on it. The cloth was coarse cloth used by Sang Sang to cover the soles of her shoes, and it was very strong. Sang Sang had wrapped it in many layers, so it took Ning Ke a long time to untie the cloth. A pestle-like object was lying quietly on the coarse cloth. The material of this pestle was a little strange. It seemed to be metal or stone, faintly exuding a cold smell, but its surface was as warm as jade, and it was engraved with complicated patterns. For decades, this club-shaped object had been kept by Master Yen Sei. Before the battle with the great divine priest of light, Master Yen Sei gave it to Sang Sang and asked her to pass it to Ningquebe. So now it was in his hands. The emperor silently looked at the pestle-shaped thing on the ground. No one knew if he thought of Master Yen Sei, but his face showed a faint sadness and nostalgia. Ning Ke reached out to hold the pestle and felt the cool and warm touch in his palm. He was a little nervous and put his left hand on it. He took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down so that his hands were no longer trembling. Then he put the pestle upright and slowly inserted it into the hole. The pestle in his hand sank into the ground inch by inch. Ning Ke did not feel any resistance, but he could feel the smoothness of the ground. With a light click, the pestle touched the bottom of the cave, as if it was locked by some kind of spring. A small part of the pestle was still exposed on the ground. The complicated patterns engraved on it made it look like a flower carved out of the pestle. Ning Ke did not know what was going to happen next. He subconsciously stepped back and wanted to stay away from it. There was no vigilance on the emperor's face. He just quietly looked at the half of the pestle on the ground. Ning Ke stopped and stood beside the emperor. After a moment, the half of the pestle exposed on the ground suddenly lit up. More precisely, it should be the complicated patterns on the pestle that were difficult to understand lit up, like a flower bathing in the sun. The complicated patterns became brighter and brighter. The light spread to the lower part of the pestle. Even the granite ground was illuminated and the lines in the stone could be seen. The light in the lines on the pestle gradually condensed and seemed to become a kind of luminous liquid. It gradually flowed back and forth along the lines, which was very beautiful. A crack suddenly appeared on the granite ground next to the pestle. The crack spread extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it passed through the soles of Ning Ke's feet, which scared him. Then he noticed that these cracks were not real cracks, but grooves formed by the regular subsidence of the ground. Numerous stone grooves appeared on the previously clean and empty ground. More and more stone grooves appeared, and they became denser and denser. Like an invisible carving knife, it drew countless straight lines on the smooth stone ground and cut the ground into countless parts. The liquid light on the pestle flowed down the complicated lines and into the stone groove next to it. Then, like a stream, it flowed along the stone groove and into the distance. However, there was absolutely no stream in the world that could flow as fast as the liquid light in the stone groove. In a flash, it had spread to the edge of the ground. No one knew how much light was contained in the pestle. It kept flowing to the ground, as if it was inexhaustible. After a moment, all the stone grooves were lit up. Looking at the magical scene in front of him, Ning Ke revealed a nervous and solemn expression. But his eyes became brighter and brighter. His gaze kept moving along with the flow of the liquid light in the stone groove. The stone groove at the edge of the ground was the deepest and contained the most liquid light. For extremely long straight lines surrounded the ground in the center of the hall, like a city. There was a deep, wide, and dazzling stone groove in the middle. It seemed to be a long street. "This is the Vermilion Bird Avenue?" Ning Ke looked at the stone groove and muttered to himself. His Majesty looked at his expression and smiled slightly. Suddenly, the calm liquid light in the stone groove violently rolled, as if there was a raging fire under the ground and the liquid light was about to boil. Ning Ke's expression became more and more solemn. A very faint sound rang in the underground hall, as if countless flowers were blooming, as if countless green trees were breathing, as if countless people were cheering. In reality, it was just the liquid light in the stone groove that had evaporated into gas. The evaporated gas filled the air in the hall, gently swaying like clouds. Then, unable to escape the gravitational pull of the stone groove, it slowly converged into lines or surfaces that glowed with light. These lines and surfaces that glowed with beautiful and pure light formed countless three-dimensional structures on the ground. They were countless glowing buildings that looked so illusory, yet so real at the same time. Ning Ke looked at the palace formed by light in front of him. He looked at the Yanming Mountain in the distance, which was almost at the waist height. He looked at the Wanyan Pagoda that was not even knee-high and looked at the thick and glossy city wall in the distance. He was so shocked that he could not speak for a long time. This was a miniature Chang'an city. But in this Chang'an city it was real and alive. The emperor walked outside. Ning Ke followed behind him. When his feet stepped on the southern gate temple that was condensed from light, his body was a little stiff. When he stepped on the houses in the west of the city, he was even more careful. He always felt that he had become a giant, and any random step would cause great harm. Fortunately, the lines and surfaces that were condensed from light and vapor did not seem to be connected to the real world. When they touched his body, there were no changes. Walking in the miniature Chang'an city that was condensed by light, Ning Ke felt very complicated and shocked. He saw many familiar buildings and sceneries. He even found Lin 47th Street and the old brush pen shop among the densely packed buildings. At this moment, the old brush pen shop was just a box. Following behind His Majesty, they finally walked out of this miniature Chang'an city. For some reason, Ning Ke felt much more relaxed. He held his chest and gasped. The emperor looked at the Chang'an city in front of him and said, "The entire Chang'an city is a big array." Ning Ke had heard about this from Master Yen Sei. The first big array in the world, the God-stunning array. The emperor pointed at the pestle on the ground in the distance and the palace beside it. He said, "The center of this big array is deep in the building where we are standing now." Then he pointed at the widest, deepest and brightest stone trough and said, "The Vermilion Bird Avenue is the array route. The four walls of Chang'an city are also array route. The hole in the city is the door of life. There are countless divine talismans in this formation, and the Vermilion Bird is the most powerful one among them. When Wei Guangming hid in Chang'an, he avoided it. If he had dared to show his full power in the city, this formation would have killed him in an instant." Ning Ke listened attentively in silence. The emperor pointed at the Lake of Light at the foot of Yanming Mountain in the south of the city and said, "This big array in Chang'an city is not easy to build or maintain. Last year, the imperial court spent a lot of money to repair Yanming Lake. It has nothing to do with the people's lives. It is to maintain and repair this big array. These things have always been the responsibility of the Imperial Center Administration. The God-stunning array has a history of 1,000 years, but it has not been activated even once. However, every emperor of the Tang Empire has spared no effort to keep this big array intact. Do you know why? The emperor looked at Ning Ke and asked. Ning Ke said, because this is the last shelter of the Tang Empire. Shelter, that's a good word. The emperor said calmly, with this big array, Chang'an City will be safe. Chang'an City will be safe. Even if the national power of the Tang Empire declines and falls apart, it will eventually rise again. Ning Ke said, my master once told me that when the time comes to activate the God-stunning array, it means that the Tang Empire is in the most dangerous moment. So this big array has never been activated. The emperor said, but as long as it continues to exist in the world, whether it is activated or not, Chang'an and the Tang Empire are safe. After Ning Ke successfully climbed the mountain and entered the second floor of the academy, he was invited to the palace. At that time, the emperor said that he would take him to see something in the future. Today, he finally saw it. Master Yen Sei once took him to the tower and looked down at Chang'an City. He said that he would hand over the big array to him. Now that his master had passed away, it was finally his turn to take this responsibility. He looked at the Chang'an City in front of him and thought about it. There is one more chapter. I don't know when I can write it. I advise you not to stay up late. I will. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 4:18. Master Yen Sei once said that Chang'an was a big tactical array and also a big talisman, and the talisman was an article. Ning Ke looked at the city in front of him, and his eyes fell on the relatively red ball of light somewhere in the south of the straight stone trough. He silently thought that it was probably the seal printed next to the article. The relatively red ball of light was the vermilion bird. As Ning Ke's eyes fell on it, the edge of the ball of light slightly changed, as if it had sensed something. At this moment, Ning Ke vaguely understood how to start the big tactical array of Chang'an. It was so simple, so he was very vigilant. After leaving the shabby two-story wooden building, Ning Ke followed the emperor through the imperial garden again, passing through the awe and confusion of those eunuchs and palace maids, and came to the imperial study. It was quiet in the imperial study. Ning Ke held the array pestle wrapped in cloth, and felt a heavy feeling between his fingers. After a long silence, he said, I'm a little worried that I can't hold it. The emperor looked at him and said, Master Yen Sei only has one disciple, and the headmaster of academy has agreed that you represent the academy to enter the human realm. So who else can hold it if not you? Ning Ke said, Am I really going to be the nation master in the future? Second brother and master agreed that I would only cultivate talismans with master, and not be counted as a member of the Southern Gate Temple. Who said that the nation master of Tang must be a Taoist from the Southern Gate Temple? Yes, in order to save some face for the West Hill Divine Palace, it has been handled this way for hundreds of years. But habit doesn't mean rigid rules. Moreover, you are the disciple of Master Yen Sei, and the West Hill Divine Palace can't find any problems with your identity. The emperor said, From your tone, it seems that you don't want to be the nation master. Ning Ke said, When the West Hill Divine Palace wanted to take Sangsang back to be the great divine priest of light, I thought it was unreliable. Now that I want to be the nation master of Tang, I think it's even more unreliable. He said bitterly, Now that I think about it, I'd rather stay in the old brush pen shop to sell calligraphy. Qingshan is very happy to be the nation master. Look at him, he doesn't want to die so soon. Whether you want to be the nation master or not is a matter for the future. You don't need to worry about it now. The emperor changed the topic and said, Speaking of selling calligraphy, Ning Ke, it's been a few days since your calligraphy has been sold. Come on, take advantage of today's visit to the palace to write a few more. Ning Ke glanced at His Majesty and thought about how he was forced to leave behind many calligraphy sections every time he entered the palace. If Sang Sang knew about this, she would be heartbroken. However, the Tang Emperor personally chose the brush, ground the ink, and waited on the side. In the face of such treatment, no calligrapher in the world would be able to refuse to write. He sighed helplessly in his heart and walked to the table. At this moment, someone knocked on the door of the imperial study. The Empress slowly walked in with a plate of food in her hand. Ning Ke bowed slightly and stepped aside. Eat something first. The Empress smiled and took the Emperor's hand to the tea table. She handed a bowl of sour tea to him and then walked to Ning Ke's side. She rolled up her sleeves and picked up an ink stick, saying, "Let me grind the ink." Ning Ke thought to himself that he was not a bold and unrestrained person like Li Tai Bai. Although the Empress was plump, she was not a romantic person like Yang Yuhuan. What was this? He refused repeatedly and dared not. The Empress smiled warmly and jokingly said to him, "You dare when His Majesty grinds the ink for you, but you say you don't dare when I grind the ink for you. Could it be that in your eyes, I am much more terrifying than His Majesty?" The Emperor, who was drinking the sour tea, laughed and pointed at Ning Quebec. He said, "She is the one grinding the ink for me when I write. Today, I will let you enjoy this treatment." What kind of treatment was this? An emperor's treatment? Ning Ke smiled bitterly and did not refuse any more. He stood by the table and waited calmly. Thinking of what the Empress had said, he felt a little strange in his heart. In his opinion, the Empress was much more terrifying than His Majesty. In the world shrouded by Haotian's divine light, the saintess of diabolism could actually become the Empress of the Tang Empire, the strongest country in the world. No matter how he looked at it, it was strange and terrifying. Moreover, the Empress was Xiaoho's sister. Ning Ke looked at the Empress's silhouette in silence. The Emperor wanted to appreciate Ning Ke's new work, so he stayed in the imperial study. The Empress and Ning Ke left the imperial study and came to the imperial garden. The Empress stopped under a begonia tree and waved her hand to signal the palace maids to disperse. Then she looked back at Ning Quebec. Ning Ke knew that His Majesty was looking for an excuse to let him and the Empress be alone. Of course, it was not because of any absurd reason. It was because of the general in Tuyang City. However, he did not understand why the Empress would come in person. Was she not worried that someone would see something? This was because he did not understand the relationship between the Emperor and the Empress, or rather, he had never believed that the relationship between a commoner and a couple existed in the Emperor's palace. The Empress was beautiful, charming, gentle, and not timid. Standing under the begonia tree, her appearance was even more beautiful than the begonia flowers. Ning Ke thought that she was indeed the saintess of diabolism. She was indeed beautiful. The Empress looked at him quietly and suddenly said, "Has His Majesty told you?" After a moment of silence, Ning Ke replied, "What does Your Majesty mean?" The Empress said calmly, "About General Xiaoho." Ning Ke nodded. The Empress said, "Now you should know who I am." Ning Ke shook his head, looking a little confused. The Empress smiled sweetly and said, "What a naughty child. I really don't understand why the headmaster of academy would accept you as a student." Ning Ke smiled and said, "Many people have the same question." The smile on the Empress's face gradually faded. She looked at him calmly and proudly and said without any other emotions, "Xiaoho is my brother. I used to be the saintess of diabolism." In Tuyang City, Ning Ke had already known the biggest secret of the Tang Empire through the conversation between second brother and Xiao. However, he did not expect that the Empress would admit it directly without any disguise. That was why he was still extremely shocked. The Empress looked at him and said, "I am very curious about the problem between you and Xiaoho. Although he is violent and enjoys killing on the battlefield, he is definitely not an idiot like you and His Majesty like to call him. He should be very clear that killing a student of the headmaster of academy will not do him any good. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, 2 years ago at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road in Min Mountain, General Xiaoho's subordinates tried to kill Princess Li Yu. I was there at that time. The Empress gently plucked the begonia branch in front of her face and walked to the depths of the imperial garden with her hands behind her back. Ning Ke followed behind her and looked at her with her hands behind her back. For some reason, he felt some admiration for her. Walking to the side of the quiet lake and standing in front of the flowering tree, the Empress said after a moment of silence, "He did this behind my back. I even suspect that the Divine Hall did it in his name." She turned around and looked at Ning Ke quietly. She said, "Now that you are also a cultivator, you should know that if it was me or General Xiaoho who attacked with all their strength, you and Li Yu would definitely not have a chance to survive." Ning Ke thought of the two powerhouses at the upper see-through state beside Xiaoho and tacitly agreed. He said, "If this matter was done by the Divine Hall, Your Majesty will not be able to find any evidence, because those people are General Xiaoho's men after all." The Empress smiled slightly and said, "I may not be able to convince Li Yu, but I think at least now you will have a different judgment on what happened at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road." Ning Ke said, "In the wilderness, Lin Ling wanted to kill me." He knew that the Empress in front of him must know who Lin Ling was and must also know about the horse gang attack. He did not need to explain too much. The Empress said, "I still do not think that the horse gang incident has anything to do with Xiaoho." Ning Ke said, "I agree with Your Majesty. I also think that Lin Ling did this behind General Xiaoho's back. But General Xiaoho expressed his tacit approval afterward and tried to kill me again at the north of Hulun Sea." The Empress said, "Lin Ling would not do anything that would harm Xiaoho's interests, so he would not try to kill you unless he knew that only one of you could survive." Ning Ke shook his head after a moment of silence and said, "I was just an ordinary soldier in the city of Wei in the past. I have never even seen General Xiaoho's face. Apart from these two things, it is impossible for there to be any hatred." The Empress looked at his eyes quietly and asked, "There really is no hatred?" Ning Ke said, "Indeed." The Empress suddenly bowed slightly to him. Ning Ke was inexplicably shocked. He hurriedly moved aside and said, "Your Majesty, what are you doing? The previous matter has been settled by Mr. First. If there is really no hatred that cannot be solved, Mr. 13, please give me some face and let him retire peacefully. How about that?" The Empress restrained herself in front of the flower tree and maintained a half-squatting posture. Walking on the crowded Vermilion Bird Avenue, Ning Ke looked calm, but his heart was in turmoil. Whether it was the god-stunning array that His Majesty took him to see or the Empress bowing in front of the flower tree, it was a pressure that he could not bear now. Previously in the Imperial Garden, the Empress also mentioned Mistress Jian. Ning Ke then remembered the rumors in Chang'an. The Empress and Aunt Jian were really as close as sisters. These things did not affect his mood. What really affected his mood was something else. Now the war in the northern wilderness had entered a stalemate. The Tang military did not seem to care about victory. There seemed to be some problems within the West Hill Divine Palace. They seemed to have the intention to temporarily stop the war and wait to see what would happen. This meant that Xiaoho would come back in autumn. Ning Ke had long known that Xiaoho came from the Desolate Man's tribe. At this time, he naturally understood why the northeast border military of the empire was so gentle in this war. Xiaoho might not be so gentle to other enemies. Now Ning Ke was not afraid of Xiaoho because he had the backing of the academy. But he did not know what to do when Xiaoho came back. His Majesty secretly instructed him in the palace, and Her Majesty personally pleaded in front of the flowering tree. It was not because they were afraid that a cultivator in the see-through realm could cause a big storm. They just did not want this matter to involve the academy, and did not want Xiaoho's retirement to have more twists and turns. The academy respected the law of the Tang Empire. The headmaster of the academy strictly forbade students from interfering in court affairs. Eldest brother had already allowed Xia Ho to retire. It seemed that Ning Kei's revenge had all been written until the end, except for the last method. Tomorrow there will be 3 more chapters. Brace up your courage and say it with a trembling voice, and then recommend the first place on the weekly list. Thank you. It's a new day. Please continue to vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 419. The method was taught to him by the headmaster of the academy with a stick on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes. Eldest brother also hinted at it in the wilderness. He also thought of the method when he was imprisoned in the cliff cave. The method was simple, clear, and full of power. However, from another perspective, it could be said to be stupid and not in line with Ning Kei's bright but dark outlook on life. Standing on the streets of Chang, and in late spring, Ning Kei thought about what would happen after autumn. He was sometimes excited and sometimes gloomy. He did not notice a cloud floating from the north. "Are you Mr. 13? Ning Kei looked back and saw a man bowing to him respectfully. The man was dressed in ordinary civilian clothes, but it could not hide the stern aura of a soldier. Since last spring, he had become a celebrity in Chang'an. However, not many people had seen his face and could recognize him on the streets of Chang'an. Ning Kei was a little vigilant, especially because of the identity of the man. The man admitted his identity in the next sentence. "General Su Shi requests your presence." The Tang Empire dominated the world with iron armor and swept the world with force. Naturally, they valued and respected soldiers, especially the 4 generals. The Defender General of the state, Su Shi, had fought for decades and gained many military achievements. He had opened up countless territories for the empire. Even Xia Ho, who had been very famous in the past decade, could only look up to him. He was the most powerful person in the military of the empire in terms of military achievements and reputation. Ning Kei knew that the most powerful general did not have a good impression of him. He did not know the specific reason, but he knew that he would meet him sooner or later. However, he did not expect it to be today. He did not expect that he would be tracked by the Tang Empire the moment he left the palace. General Su Shi did not choose to meet Ning Kei at the military ministry. Instead, he chose to meet Ning Kei in the general's mansion near the Vermilion Bird Avenue. It seemed that this was a private conversation. Following the man into the imposing general's mansion, Ning Kei frowned slightly. He was stimulated by the killing aura emitted by the poplars and stones in the mansion. Walking into the depths of the general's mansion, he saw the old general sitting by a desk on a quiet platform. The old general wasn't wearing court robes, official robes, or armor. Instead, he was wearing very ordinary cloth clothes. He wasn't planting cabbages or sharpening knives. Instead, he was holding a rice bowl and eating. The dishes on the table were very simple: 2 bowls of brown rice, a bowl of pork belly, and 3 pieces of boiled vegetables. The man who led Ning Kei into the mansion left quietly. Ning Kei stood outside the stage. After a moment of silence, he walked up the stairs and bowed slightly in front of the old general. The old general said, "Sit." Ning Kei lifted the front lapel of his academy uniform and sat down. He looked across. The old general said, "I didn't expect you to come so soon. Let me finish my meal first. Mr. 13, please don't blame me for being rude." Ning Kei bowed his head and said, "General, your words make me afraid." The old general did not say anything more and continued to concentrate on eating. The old general's hair was white and his dark cheeks were full of wrinkles. He was a little hunched and wore ordinary cloth clothes. He looked like an idle old man that could be seen everywhere in Chang'an. However, when he picked up the chopsticks to pick up the meat, it was as if he was holding a spear and stabbing it into the chest of the enemy general. It was very domineering. Although the general was old, He was not an old general. A general was a general, especially when facing the enemy. The streaky pork gravy mixed with the brown rice smelled a bit fragrant, but the taste was presumably only average. The general, however, enjoyed it very much. His grizzled beard trembled from time to time, and the 3 pieces of boiled vegetables made crunching sounds as he chewed on them. It was as if those legendary demons from the underworld were gnawing on human bones. Perhaps it was a habit formed during his military career. The general ate very quickly. He swept away all the food on the table like a gust of wind. Then, he picked up the teacup and rinsed his mouth. Ninkei said, "Eating too quickly and drinking tea in a hurry is not good for your health." The general looked at him quietly and said, "You don't have to pretend in front of me." Ninkei fell silent and stopped pretending to be a junior. He pretended to be gentle and considerate. The general said, "Cultivators should come out of the human realm, not enter it." Ninkei did not expect that the conversation would enter the most critical stage without any foreshadowing or preamble. He could not help but be caught unprepared. He had originally thought that this would be a long conversation. He had thought that this conversation would be like boiling chicken soup and that they would need to test each other's fire control. He did not expect that it would be so fierce and quick. If he was not careful, the vegetables in the pot would become burnt and could no longer be eaten. "Why not enter the human realm?" Ninkei asked after a moment of silence. The general looked into his eyes and said indifferently, "Because for cultivators, the human world is too weak. They are like ants. It is easy for cultivators to become arrogant when they enter the human realm." Ninkei raised his head and looked back at the general's calm and oppressive eyes. He said, "General, you have fought for the Tang Empire and have been in the human world for decades. Before being a cultivator, I am first a soldier." The general said indifferently, "That is the biggest difference." Ninkei said, "I am also a soldier." The general shook his head slowly and said, "You used to be a soldier and an excellent one. But unfortunately, you were not a cultivator when you were a soldier." "What's the difference?" Ninkei asked. The general squinted and looked at him. He said in a low voice, "If you could cultivate in the city of Wei, I would have trained you well and made you a great martial cultivator. Then you would have been able to truly understand what is going on the battlefield. Then the stories later would not have happened." Ninkei said after a moment of silence, "I don't understand what you mean. I have seen all your files." The general's voice was emotionless and calm. "You are indeed a good soldier. But you have not experienced a real battle with cultivators." Ninkei fell silent again. He had joined the army in the city of Wei when he was very young. But the Tang Empire was so powerful that even the cavalry of the Golden Palace on the grassland did not dare to provoke them. He had not experienced a real battle. He had not seen the performance of cultivators on the battlefield during his years of military service in the frontier fortress. The general said, "People think that cultivators are very powerful. But they do not know that on the real battlefield, cultivators are also very weak when facing the surging cavalry." Ninkei thought of a powerhouse like Second Brother and could not agree with this statement. The general seemed to know what he was thinking and said coldly, "Even a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state can only die when facing the sky full of arrows and the charge of thousands of heavy cavalry. This has been proven countless times in the history of war. Do you know why?" Ninkei shook his head. The general said, "Because the cultivator's body is too weak. Unless he can cross the threshold and break through the 5 states and enter the limitless state, he can ignore the rain of arrows. Or he can enter the Tianqi state and understand the supreme power given by Haotian. He can ignore any impact. Otherwise, a cultivator alone will never be a match for an army." "What about powerhouses at the peak of martial arts like the General or General Xiao?" Ninkei asked. General Sushir said, "Martial arts cultivators use their psyche power to summon the qi of heaven and earth to train their physical strength. They use their psyche power to condense the chi of heaven and earth on the surface of their bodies. However, as long as one is human, his sense of perception will be limited. His psyche power will eventually run out. If one person cannot kill him, then 100 people cannot. I will use 10,000 people to kill him. Remember, if a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts is invincible, why does the Empire need to keep so many cavalry? Ninkei placed his right hand on the table and looked into the general's deep eyes. He said, "One cultivator can exchange for 10,000 ordinary soldiers. Isn't that powerful?" The general looked at him expressionlessly and said, "There is not even one cultivator among 10,000 ordinary people. There are not many cultivators in the world who can fight against 10,000 people. Exchanging 10,000 ordinary soldiers for the death of a cultivator like this is a very worthwhile thing to do in war." Ninkei was silent for the third time. He turned to look at the upright poplar trees in the garden and the stones piled randomly. He had to admit that the first person in the Empire's military was right and incisive. He could not refute it. He knew very well what General Su Shi wanted to talk to him, so he was not willing to be convinced. He frowned slightly and said, "But you and General Xiaohou are also cultivators." At this point, the conversation had returned to the beginning. The cultivation of martial arts is difficult and clumsy. Without decades of hard work, there is no effect at all. Most people give up halfway when they have some brute strength and muscles. They become the servants of sword masters and psyche masters. So for the cultivation sex, the cultivation of martial arts is almost useless. The general said, "Only in the army can a martial arts cultivator have the chance to grow through bloody battles. To cultivate to the peak, who knows how many people they have to kill and how many times they have to be injured?" Ninkei asked, "What does this have to do with what you want to say?" "What I want to say is that all martial arts cultivators are in the army. Just like what I told you at the beginning, whether in the eyes of the world or in their own eyes, they are strictly disciplined soldiers first, then so-called cultivators. They do not carry umbrellas in summer and do not wear fur coats in winter. They have less selfish desires." "I understand." Ninkei looked at the leftover juice of the boiled vegetables on the plate and said, "But I don't understand what you are trying to tell me by saying this." The general looked at him expressionlessly and said, "What I want to tell you is that you are very weak. No matter how fast your cultivation level has improved, in my eyes and in the eyes of the Tang military, you are still very weak. With a single order from me, the armored black cavalry can charge at you and kill you. You only have 13 arrows. How many times can you swing a saber like the one used against Lu Yiqing? So don't be arrogant. You must know how to respect the law of the Tang Empire." Ninkei raised his head and looked at the general's old face. He said, "I have always been law-abiding." The general said coldly, "As I said, I have checked all your files and information. Since it is not limited to the records in the city of Wei. I know how many horse gangs by the Shubi Lake died under your knife. I also know that 3 families of hunters in Min Mountain were burned to death by you. As I said, don't pretend in front of me." The general said coldly, "Killing the horse gangs and chopping firewood is fine because the law of the Tang Empire does not protect people outside the borders. But how are you going to explain what happened in Min Mountain? One of the families had a newborn baby who also died in the fire. How are you going to explain it? No matter how you hide in front of the headmaster of the academy and His Majesty, no matter what image you have in the eyes of the world, no matter how frivolous and funny you pretend to be after you come to Chang'an, you can't change the fact that you are a shameless, cold-blooded, greedy, and murderous villain." Ninkei lowered his head again and said nothing. He did not expect that the Tang Empire could investigate someone so far in the past. At this moment, he felt that his clothes had suddenly disappeared, as if he was naked. This feeling was not shame or guilt, but vigilance and uneasiness. He had never thought of himself as a good person, and he had never wanted to be one. In order to survive, in order to let Sang Sang live, he would do anything. Killing and arson were just ordinary things. The evil deeds that the general exposed were just an inconspicuous part of the bloody past. How could a person like him be a good person? Su Shi looked at him and said with disgust, "Ning Ke, you are not a good person." There was dead silence on the platform. Ning Ke suddenly raised his head and looked at Su Shi, who was sitting across the table. He asked with a smile, "General, is there really a person as clean and guiltless as snow in the world?" The general looked at him and said with a slight mockery, "Do you want to comfort yourself with the filth of others?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, "General, you talked about how difficult it is to be a martial cultivator and the suffering of the Tang Empire's soldiers. To me it is a little boring. Because you have not experienced my life, you do not know what I have suffered. Naturally, you cannot understand the choice I made in the past." He looked at the general and said with a smile, "In the deep forest of the mountains, you were caught by a hunter. For some reason, it could be because you stole a rabbit from his snare 10 days ago, or because the hunter was a damned rabbit to begin with, or because the hunter was a relative of the damned old hunter. In short, he wanted to kill you. What would you do?" The general frowned slightly. Before the general said anything, Ning Ke continued with a smile, "Don't forget, you were not even 10 years old at that time. You were weak and tired because of malnutrition. You had a 5 or 6-year-old girl with you. You were injured and had no weapon. You only had a fire starter hidden in your crotch. Then you were locked in the woodshed. I don't know what you would do, General, but I would definitely light the thatch and dry wood in the woodshed. I don't care if the hunter died or not. I don't care if there was a baby in the room. Even if there was a paralyzed old man in the room, I would still light the fire." Ning Ke's smile was very gentle, and the expression in his eyes was very calm. The next chapter will be out before midnight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 420. Su Shi's eyes narrowed. He had fought all his life and seen blood and corpses. He had seen many horrible scenes. However, the gentle smile and calm expression on Ning Ke's face seemed to be more soul-stirring than those scenes he had seen in the past. In an instant, he thought more highly of Ning Ke and was more vigilant about how dangerous Ning Ke was. The sympathy that occasionally flashed in his eyes disappeared without a trace. Ning Ke continued, "Of course, the story of the hunter's family being burned to death has nothing to do with me. I just heard it from others. I'm just curious, under such circumstances, what would you choose? I still want to ask the previous question. Is there really a person as pure as a lotus in the world? General, have you ever killed prisoners of war on the battlefield? Is it against the law of the Tang Empire to kill prisoners of war? General, when your subordinates rode past the fortress, did they kill the women and children of the barbarians on the grassland? If so, is it against the law of the Tang Empire?" Then he looked at the general's old face and asked, "General, as an important minister of the Tang Empire, you should stand on the side of the Tang Empire. However, when the enemy's powerhouses entered the country, you not only did not guard against them, but also revealed my whereabouts to them. I would like to ask, even if this does not violate the law of the Tang Empire, does it violate your conscience?" The repeated requests for guidance were like heavy punches that continuously pounded on the old general's heart. However, Su Shi would not be shaken by Ning Ke's words. He smiled slightly angrily and said, "Since you want to enter the human realm on behalf of the Academy, you have to accept the challenge of the world's powerhouses. Why don't you want to let them know your whereabouts? Are you afraid that you will lose face for the Tang Empire and the headmaster of the Academy?" Before Ning Ke could speak, the general suddenly stopped smiling and looked at him coldly. He said, "Even if it was pardonable that you acted coldly when you were young, what about after coming to Chang'an from the city of Wei? After coming to Chang'an?" Ning Ke slowly raised his eyebrows. Suddenly, there was a wind in the garden. It was slightly cold and the sky was dim. It seemed that it was going to rain. Where were you when the censor Zhang Yiqi died in the 14th year of Tianqi era? Where were you when the old blacksmith in the east of the city died? Where were you when the tea master Yan Suqing died? The general looked at him and asked indifferently. Ning Ke's expression did not change, but his body became stiff. If his previous questioning of the general was just a small trick, then the general's 3 consecutive questions of, "Where are you?" were really sharp and cold knives that could cut off a person's head. He finally understood why Su Shi was so wary of him and even secretly investigated and suppressed him. He confirmed that many people, starting from Lin Ling to the current number 1 person in the Tang military, had noticed the murders and even smelled the scent behind them. Today, in the general's mansion, the conversation between him and the general. He was a general. When the censor Zhang Yiqi died, you were in the House of Red Sleeves. When Chen Zixian died, you were in the east of the city. When Yan Suqing died, no one knew where you were. However, that day was the Academy's examination. You had a bet with Xie Qingyun of the South Jin Kingdom, but for some reason, you did not attend the examination and even took 2 days of sick leave. The general stared into his eyes and said slowly with endless pressure, "Don't think that you are really strong, don't think that you can really hide from everyone in the world, and don't think that you can erase the past just because you have become the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. I said that I know everything about you, so I will tell you everything. Not a single thing will be missing. Not a single thing would be missing. Not a single thing could be missing." This was the spirit of the number 1 person in the Tang military. Ning Ke heard the general say something like this for the 3rd time today. He did not know how many times he fell into silence. There was also silence on the platform. The poplar trees in the garden were slightly trembling in the wind before the rain. The leaves that should have lived in the north whistled, as if they would fall to the ground at any time. No one knew how long it had been. The general said, "The headmaster of the academy once said that the law of the Tang Empire comes first. This is the highest creed not only for the academy, but also for the entire Tang Empire. I will investigate what happened in the past. If I find out that you have violated the law of the Tang Empire, interfered with the court affairs, or even plotted against us, I will punish you according to the law of the Tang Empire." Ning Ke suddenly reached out and stacked the dishes in front of him. Then he stood up, looked at the general and said, "The law of the Tang Empire emphasizes evidence. If you can get the evidence of these murder cases, I will wait for you in the Chang, and local government." After saying this, he bowed to the general and left. After walking out of the general's mansion, it was not long before Ning Ke arrived at the familiar Vermilion Bird Avenue. He strolled on the flat bluestone road, looking calm and composed. In the end, someone still guessed that he was related to those murder cases. This made him very nervous, but he was not shocked by the conversation in the general's mansion. Even if Su Shi could represent the entire Tang Empire to sweep the world, he could not accuse Ning Ke without evidence, let alone cause any harm to him. Because he was not a soldier in the city of Wei, nor was he a foreigner who had just arrived in Chang'an. He was now a student of the 2nd floor of the academy and a great calligrapher who was close to His Majesty. If he wanted to harm him now, he must first convince His Majesty, and most importantly, the headmaster of the academy. Ning Ke could not guess His Majesty's attitude, but he was very clear that the headmaster of the academy would not care how many people his student had killed, because the headmaster of the academy did not care about worldly affairs. However, some parts of the conversation in the general's mansion did have some emotional impact on him. Su Shi was right. From the time he escaped from Chang unto the thousands of miles of starvation and entered the dangerous Min Mountain, Ning Ke was, in a way, a person who did all kinds of evil. The reason why he did all kinds of evil was because the world he lived in was full of evil. In order to survive in the evil world, he had to do all kinds of evil. Later, he came to the city of Wei and then to Chang'an. He came to the peaceful and happy world and found that there were still many good people in the world, so he began to try to be a good person in the general sense. Everyone wanted to be a good person. Ning Ke also wanted to be a good person. Therefore, he had been learning how to be a good person since the city of Wei, all the way to Chang'an. This kind of learning could be said to be a kind of disguise, or even more like the formation of a second personality. This kind of personality was very unstable. Sometimes he was mean, sometimes he nagged, and sometimes he pretended to be shameless to win people's favor. It was a little fresh and a little cute, but the real temperament in his bones was actually still the moment when he held the blood-dripping hatchet in the woodshed of the official of council's mansion when he was 4 years old. If he faced external pressure, if he faced death again, that ruthless and cold temperament would burst out from the deepest part of his body without hesitation. It was the night when he climbed to the 2nd floor. It was the same when he met the horse gang in the wilderness. It was the same when he shot Prince Long Qing by the Daming Lake. It was always like this, and sometimes not. This was Ning Quebec unconsciously. He walked to the front of the Vermilion Bird. At this moment, the spring rain that had been planned for a long time finally fell. Chapter 3. Try to finish before 2:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.